燃え上がれガンダム。Welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here after an unexpected delay to once again talk about the wonderful and wacky world of Mobile Suit Gundam. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Hey, Sean. It is good to be back. We did not intend to have... I think this is the longest break we've taken so far in the lifespan of Weekly Suit Gundam.
Yes.
And we can talk a little bit about that in a moment, but I will tell you, I am very, very happy to be back, because there's little I like more in this world than talking about Gundam.
Yes, we have been trying to get this podcast recorded for a long time now, and there's just been a lot of other stuff going on. But yes, I am super happy to be back. I've missed being able to talk about Gundam on this podcast, because it is fun. Gundam is good. Even when you're not talking about my favorite Gundam, we are still talking about Gundam.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell the folks what we're going to be talking about this week?
Yes, so we are now on part 2 of our OVA spectacular, of us looking at all the OVAs we kind of skipped over in our original watch through from Mobile Suit Gundam all the way up through Turn A Gundam. So before we move on to Gundam Seed, we wanted to fill in all those little gaps. So last episode we did 0080 War in the Pocket. And then today we are doing the second OVA series, which is 0083 Stardust Memory.
Yes, which I have had a complicated relationship with. This is like War in the Pocket, my second time seeing it. I think your second time probably too.
Yes, this is only the second time I've seen it.
Yeah, so this is not one of the ones where it is new to either of us. But I have complicated thoughts on this one, which makes me actually very excited to record this episode, not just because we've been away for a while, but because this is one that I really do want to talk through, because I have a lot of good thoughts and a lot of bad thoughts, and this show is, I think, one of the more interesting on a critical level to talk about in the world of Gundam.
Yeah, because it's definitely not one of my favorite Gundams, but I think the things that are bad about it are different than how like Gundam Wing is bad. Like this is only the second one I would look at them like, I don't know if I would call Stardust Memory bad per se. I would maybe categorize it more as frustrating. But typically, you know, we've only really so far talked about a lot of the very best of Gundam. And so Stardust Memory is one where it's got a lot of like the good things about the OVAs, while it also has elements in it that feel like a precursor to some of the things that future Gundam shows would not get right. As it moves away from some of the more traditional Tomino-styled Gundam. So I do think it's a really interesting kind of touchstone and like kind of turning point in the history of the franchise. And it's definitely one, I think it's one of the Gundams we have talked most about without actually doing an episode on it, because I feel like in the 90s Gundams, we referenced Stardust Memory a lot, even though we hadn't actually done an episode on it.
Yes, very necessary to finally be doing an episode. Yeah. So I'll just say really quickly for listeners, because I have it's been about 2 months since we had a Weekly Suit Gundam, and I have gotten so many messages, more than we've ever gotten on the podcast, about where the next episode is. And we've been podcasting for, 10 years now. Not all on Gundam, obviously, on lots of other things. And the basic answer is just when this podcast is coming out is September. Sean is a public school teacher. I am a graduate student, PhD candidate at a university. That means that we were doing basically dealing with beginning of semester stuff, and we're very busy, especially amidst the coronavirus pandemic and a lot of weird shit going on in the world. That is the short answer.
Yeah, it's basically, and if people want more detail, they can go and listen to some of the Weekly Stuff podcasts that have come out where we talk about that stuff in more detail. But yeah, the long and short of it is like I think I had personally underestimated the quantity of additional work that I would have because of the different kinds of accommodations around being a public school teacher during COVID and like the changing schedules. There's a lot of like really complex technical stuff that happened that then resulted in me now like having what is maybe like I would say probably like a 33 to 50% increase overall in workload, which includes like I have an additional class that I teach compared to normal. I have probably about 40 to 50 more students than I had last year. Like it's a lot of additional work. So that is why we're doing this now, is that like now I have like been able to create routines and things that allow me to sort of deal with that in a way that's more normal and not as time consuming. But it took a long time to get to the point where we could do that. So that's why this took a while to record, because I wanted to be able to record this like the last week of August was when I wanted to do this podcast in my head, where I was like, oh, I think we'll be able to do it then. I think I'll have like, you know, to take a 1 week extra week off to kind of get used to as we're going back to work. And then like, nope, that definitely was not a thing that would have been possible to do.
I mean, it's been delayed a couple times because the last one was mid-July, and I remember us specifically saying, do you want to do Stardust Memory next week? Let's give it 2 weeks. And and then like it wasn't just that like a bunch of crap happened in our lives. Also, just there's been a lot of news. Obviously, on the Weekly Stuff podcast, we cover a lot of gaming, and there's been a lot of gaming news and things like that. And it just there was never time to do it justice. And I'm glad we waited and can do it justice, because also my original plan when we were going to do it back in July was, since I had seen the OVA so recently, I saw it last summer, I was just going to watch the recap movie. But because of the delay, I watched the full 13-episode series again, and I'm very glad I did that, because it actually gave me a more positive feeling on Stardust Memory overall, and a more nuanced look at what I think is good and bad about it. So I think this is going to be good.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Do you want to give us our normal history lesson before we dive into the nitty-gritty of Stardust Memory?
Yeah, and there's really not a huge amount to talk about. Like, I think it has one of the like least kind of remarkable production histories, at least in terms of stuff that I've been managed to find. Like, I went digging around on the Japanese internet as usual, and there's just not a lot of details out there. But like, long and short of it is that War in the Pocket was very successful. It was popular. It sold really well. And so then Sunrise saw that. It was like, okay, let's continue with this OVA train. And not just War in the Pocket. Like, generally speaking, this period of the late 80s to the early to mid 90s was really fruitful for the OVA market in particular. That's one of the things that EVA is actually most credited for in terms of its influence on anime. It isn't just a stylistic thing, it's a business thing that EVA in the mid 90s kind of helps create a market for these kinds of shows to then be aired on TV rather than sold separately as they had been for several years as OVAs. But yeah, so this is the second OVA series for Gundam. It airs from May 23rd, 1991 to September 24th, 1992. It's 13 episodes, generally sold in 2-episode chunks. And it was sort of designed as a kind of interquel, to use a word that doesn't actually exist, but we sometimes say, which is something that exists between Mobile Suit Gundam and Zeta Gundam. So the 0083 in the title refers to where it takes place in the timeline. So it's a few years after the 1 Year War ends, but a little bit before the Titans and Camille and all that stuff that you get in Zeta Gundam. And it's
I believe we call it the Grips conflict.
Yes, the Grips conflict, or the first Neo-Zeon War, or the beginning of the first Neo-Zeon War, however you want to talk about it. But yeah, so it's set in that kind of interquel period. Featuring, like with 0080, one of the sort of mission statements was to not use new types or any of that kind of stuff, and to do a more kind of grounded military style story in the Gundam universe. And that's kind of what they set out to do, and that's basically what they did. And how successful they were is up to you, the viewer, to kind of judge the quality of it. But I think what is not up to, I think, just an independent person just deciding whether or not is good about it, is the animation. So it had an extremely high budget. At the midpoint of its production, it was decided that they were going to do a movie kind of recap thing. So the second half has even higher budget animation, because it was effectively like being designed to be rolled into the movie and shown in movie theaters. And so it is one of the most kind of like lusciously produced Gundam series. And then it is a spectacle in that sense. In terms of the staff behind it, it is split, and this is the same thing that happens with 08th MS Team, the next OVA series. It is basically split in half in terms of the director duties. So the first half of the series, episodes 1 through 7, are directed by a woman named Mitsuko Kase, one of the first women like major directors on a Gundam project that's not just a episode director, but directs like a significant chunk of a series. So she directs the first half. She and most of the people who work on Stardust Memory really come from the VOTMs side of things. So she worked on the original Armored Trooper VOTMs and several of the OVAs that had been coming out at this point. So she directs the first half, and then a man named Takashi Imanishi directs the second half, episodes 8 through 13. And both of them obviously also are like work on the show as a whole, but in terms of the directorial duties, it's split that way. But they also do storyboards and stuff like that for the whole show. And Imanishi also not quite as kind of big a career as Mitsuko Kase had, but also is a VOTMs guy, worked on VOTMs, worked on several of the OVAs. And for script work, there's two screenwriters that worked on this that I think are notable to pick out. One is Fuyunori Gobu, who did the first 4 episodes. He is the main series composer for G Gundam, so he would go on to work on G Gundam. And he was a big VOTMs dude. Same thing with Aside Okuma, who did most of the episodes in the second half. Also a big VOTMs guy. He did the 5 episodes in the second half of the show. And then there's one storyboard person who I was utterly shocked to see this name, and it's amazing to me, as I had absolutely no idea that this dude worked on this. Shinichiro Watanabe did the storyboards for episodes 3, 6, and 10. And if you don't recognize that name, you probably recognize the name Cowboy Bebop, because he's the dude who made Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, Space Brothers, and a bunch of other really great shows. And I had absolutely no idea he worked on this, and when I was looking up the credits, I saw his name, and I'm like, they can't mean that Shinichiro Watanabe, can they? And no, they 100% is that dude. He did storyboards for 3 of these episodes. I
have my Cowboy Bebop, my new Steelbook right here. Came out last week of the complete series, and this is just a nice little Steelbook package. So I have actually never seen Cowboy Bebop, but I'm excited to watch it. In part because of the Sunrise connection. But actually that makes sense that he did those, because actually episode 10 I have in my notes right here is one of the best animated boarded everything episodes of the series. So that's kind of cool. You said 3, 6, and 10. I'm like, yeah, I actually really like all 3 of those episodes. So those are 3 of the standouts in Stardust Memory. So that's very cool. Yes. And it's also worth noting, this is a period when Gundam just isn't on TV, because Double Zeta ended in 89? No, before that. It would have been earlier, 87?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometime around there.
Yeah, and then you had Char's Counterattack in the late 80s. You had F91 in 92, I think, is when that came out. So, and then Victory Gundam is the next one that's on TV in 93, right? 93 to 94?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 93.
Yeah, and so this is like a 4 or 5 year period where Gundam just isn't on TV, but it's still a very active period. You have the 2 big movies, you have 3 OVA series, and this is one of those. I think you noted the movie that came out. The movie is called The Afterglow of Zeon, and that is the Stardust Memory recap movie. But it's also if you look at that, I have not watched that movie in whole, but I kind of jumped around in it. And it's kind of weird because it basically just omits the first episode and Nina narrates it. And then it goes through the first half of the series very fast, and it's primarily there to show the last 2 episodes of the OVA, because those were actually not out on tape when it was shown in theaters. So it was a big theatrical event to go see the end of Stardust Memory, which kind of is sad because the end of Stardust Memory is by far the worst part of Stardust Memory. But you can tell the animation. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff like episode 10, the big fight between Kou and Gato. I would pay to see that on the big screen. That'd be pretty cool. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it is. Yeah. And that was what I was going to mention is, yes, the movie did come out before, it was a month or so before the last 2 episodes released on Laserdisc or VHS, which I would love. I have no Laserdisc player, but I would love to own these OVAs on Laserdisc because it just seems fucking rad.
It seems rad.
Laserdisc seems like the medium you're supposed to own OVAs on to me.
Yes. Well, absolutely, because part of it is that OVAs were there for the higher animation value, right? And Laserdisc had very high quality. It was an analog format that was essentially lossless, so it was really cool. But yeah, do we want to dive into talking about the show itself now?
I think we can dive into talking about 0083 Stardust Memory. So yeah, like with War in the Pocket, this is slightly different from our usual Mobile Suit Gundam MO in that we have both already watched it. So, Jonathan, I want you to give like a kind of recap of what your feelings were the first time, and then how have they, broadly speaking, changed on the second viewing.
So yeah, so I've had a complicated relationship with this show because I watched Stardust Memory in my first blush, in my honeymoon phase of Gundam fandom, when Gundam and I were just rolling around in the sheets day and night all the time. I think that was the period last summer, Sean, where I very dutifully went through the original Gundam with you slowly and didn't go past any of like marker points you laid down so we could do those 6 episodes on original Gundam. And then when we had finished those episodes, and I had seen, Char and Amuro have their fencing fight and all of that, and Char blowing off Kaisilia Zabi's head, and I had finished the original series, then I went on a fucking bender, and I watched everything from the 1 Year War phase. So I watched everything. I watched 8th MS Team. I watched War in the Pocket. I watched Gundam The Origin. I watched Gundam Thunderbolt. Just everything I could get my hands on. I was reading the manga. I then jumped ahead and did Zeta Gundam, and I did Zeta Gundam so fast you were like getting whiplash, because then we did our Zeta Gundam episode kind of out of the blue. And then I did wind up watching Stardust Memory in between Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta. And Stardust Memory was interesting because it was the first time I felt like I kind of hit the brakes. It was the first time where, like, I still watched it pretty fast. I watched it in a couple days. It's only 13 episodes. But, like, it was the first time where I was like, oh, this is a Gundam thing I do not head over heels love. And, I remember there were things I liked in the first, like, half of the series. I remember being very lukewarm on the second half and then hating the ending. And I had kind of made fun of Stardust Memory a lot over time. And I think I'd even said that it was my least favorite Gundam at certain points through everything we had seen. Watching it again, I would amend some of that. It was, I think, watching it again, for one, this is the longest break I've taken in watching Gundam since we started watching Gundam, was after finishing Turn A. I just, we did the War in the Pocket episode. But after rewatching War in the Pocket, which I watched in one night, I've been doing lots of other stuff. I haven't actually watched that much anime at all. I've just been watching other things. And so I'd been away from Gundam for a while. And coming back to Stardust Memory, there was a little bit of that, like, coming into a warm, comforting bath. Because even lesser Gundam is Gundam. And it's, like, nice to be in it. But also, it allowed me, I think, taking it out of the context of everything else. Because also, like, on the internet, Stardust Memory is weirdly hyped as, like, the Zeta Gundam prequel. And I think that is an unfair expectation to place on it. That is not what this show is doing. If you are going in expecting a detailed origin story of the Titans or like the state of the world in Zeta Gundam, that's just not what it's interested in, and that's not what it delivers. So like watching it without any of those expectations, I definitely enjoyed it more the second time, a lot more. I think there is a lot of really, really good stuff in Stardust Memory. I think it has a couple of like standout episodes that are just some of my favorite Gundam half hours. I think the second episode of the series, where they are pursuing Anavel across Australia, is just a phenomenal, just meat and potatoes Gundam episode. I think there are other standouts throughout. Episode 8, which is the one where Lieutenant Burning dies. I mean, they telegraph it as hard as it is possible to telegraph it, and I still think it is a kind of great Gundam death. Episodes 9 and 10, I think, are probably the peak of the entire series, which is where Anavel just goes crazy as the Nightmare of Solomon. And then in episode 10, you get the big fight between Gato and Kou, which is one of the best fights in all of Gundam. The animation is fucking incredible. So there's a lot of standout episodes. I think this was true the first time I watched it. It's true now. I think Anavel Gato is one of the great Gundam characters. I think Akio Otsuka is incredible in that part. And I still kind of just wish this show was about him and not about all the other stuff. I like the voice performances throughout. I really like Ryo Horikawa as a young, wide-eyed Gundam boy, which is funny because we all know Ryo Horikawa as Vegeta, who is not a young, wide-eyed anything. So I enjoy that. Obviously, we will talk about this at length. The animation in Stardust Memory is just consistently jaw-dropping. I love the music. Stardust Memory does have probably my favorite set of Gundam theme songs other than Zeta. I think the 2 openings and 2 endings for Stardust Memory are incredible, and the winner in particularly, the first opening, it would be in like my top 5 Inner Circle Gundam songs. It's so fucking good. So yeah, there's all of that, but then there's really, I can summarize my problem with this show in 2 words, and those 2 words are Nina Purpleton, who I do think is the worst character in all of Gundam. Bar none, I have not seen a worse character. She is a holistic, top-to-bottom, disaster of a character. This show's entire gender politics are fucked in a way that is really distinctly unique from how Tomino wrote women in the other Gundam shows, and I think sadly set a precedent for stuff like Gundam Wing, and as I understand it, some of the 2000s Gundam in how it deals with women. And I think all of that is bad, and I also think it face plants so hard on resolving the story of Kou in the final episode and the entire rival pilot schema of this show. I think the final 2 episodes are just bad. They are confused. They are poorly written. They are just boring. They are a shuddering anti-climax. And I think that's what brings Stardust Memory down for me. I don't think it's the worst Gundam. I actually like this quite a bit more than Gundam Wing. Gundam Wing is my least favorite Gundam. But I do think this is the weakest of the Universal Century Gundam stories. But I don't want to, wallow in that, because I do think Stardust Memory has quite a bit worth recommending it, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it on second viewing.
Interesting, yeah, because I feel like I share some of your opinion on how you've kind of come around more on it, but I don't think I'm as positive in those ways. Like, my memory of Stardust Memory was, I realized upon rewatching it entirely, I remembered the first 2 to 3 episodes. I remembered the ending, because it's hard to forget what they do at the ending with how fucking out of nowhere and bad it is. And I vaguely remembered some of the stuff in the middle section where Kou, deserts and then he finds Kelly, which is actually, one of my favorite moments in the whole thing. We'll talk about the weird choice they used to use the ending theme magic over a montage between those two. That is maybe the most homoerotic thing in all of Gundam, and I was stunned upon rewatching it. I had a vague impression of that whole sequence in the montage on rewatching it. I'm like, man, did they know what they were doing when they made this? Because it is pretty great. But other than that, all the connective tissue, I had totally forgotten about this whole show.
Yeah, sorry, all I was going to say is one of my notes is this is sort of Top Gun Gundam, this needed more latent homoeroticism, and you do get that in the episode with Kelly. So, that's where you get the much-needed latent homoeroticism to make this Top Gundam, but it needed more of that.
Yeah.
But go on.
Yeah, and I definitely remembered it being it is the Top Gun Gundam. It is the most sort of military dude Gundam, because, there's no new types. Kou, while he is young and inexperienced, he's 19. He's not 15 years old, right? He's not a Gundam boy. He is maybe a Gundam. He's a Gundam young adult, right?
Yes.
That's kind of where he's at. And so I had some of those vague impressions of it, but I hadn't watched it since 2015 or whenever I would have originally gone through all these, maybe mid 2016 when I was watching through Gundam originally, and I just never gone back to this the way I had with the movies and the way I had with the other OVAs, because they're very consumable. And so upon rewatching it, I was just kind of surprised about how much detail I had forgotten about all the individual episodes. And it kind of makes sense to me that I would have lost that, because I think while the Stardust Memory, other than some of the stuff at the end, is never does anything that I would really categorize as being bad, I think it often in a narrative sense is fairly uninteresting. I think it doesn't really know, I think, what it wants to do in a thematic sense. It doesn't really know what story it wants to tell. And because of that, it ends up just feeling it feels like the story ends up being really nihilistic, almost on accident. It doesn't feel like they're doing a story where there's where that's about nihilism or is about how ideology doesn't means nothing in the face of systems or whatever it is that the show kind of lands on. I have a hard time sort of precisely figuring out what the show is trying to do or trying to be, because it feels like it shifts in weird ways. And and that is evident in the worst decision it makes with Nina, where they don't do anything. And I was shocked upon rewatching it to see this. They do nothing in the entire first half of the show to set up the whole Gato and Nina were in a relationship twist. It's not even alluded to or foreshadowed in any way whatsoever till episode 6. And even then it's only very broadly alluded to. So it's it just feels haphazard in a way in terms of its plotting. That means that there are lots of individual moments and some individual episodes that I do think work quite well, and the production value of it is so good that it's easy to sort of enjoy the show along the way. But it very much feels like a popcorn Gundam in that you enjoy the moment, the experience of watching it for most of it, and then especially the aftertaste at the end is so sour that I expect I will have forgotten a lot of what Stardust Memory is in a year again. Is kind of my impression of it.
I agree with a lot of this, and I actually had the same experience where even though I actually do like a lot of the stuff in the middle, I had very much forgotten, like, the exact order of events, or like where Lieutenant Burning died, or like all I knew he did, and I did not remember how, and just like a bunch of stuff like that. That it was kind of a haze. I actually think, and I was thinking about this a lot while watching it, because like there are a lot of things I like and think work about this show. I think it's in the wrong format. I think this should have been a 2-hour movie. Like, this is such a good setup for a 2-hour movie, which is trainee pilot who is a young, like, plucky upstart, is involved in this incident where a Gundam is stolen by this radical ideologue, and they start this, like, they become rival pilots, and at the same time he is on this sort of coming-of-age thing where he is discovering himself as a man, and they chase each other across the stars, and then they fight. That's a 2-hour movie. It's like... It's Rocky in space. It's like, you know, it's that kind of thing. It's like this rival pilot story in space. 13 episodes is too much, and like I think there are a couple of good threads in this show that are just not really sustainable over 13 episodes, and they never really figure out how to sustain. But it's not hard at all for me to imagine the very effective 2-hour movie version of Stardust Memory. And I don't mean the Afterglow of Zeon recap movie. I mean like an actual, like, made as a 2-hour movie thing. I think you could make something really special out of it. I think there's just a lot of the mistakes come from this isn't really an episodic piece of storytelling in the way that, like, when we get to 8th MS Team next time, that one is so perfectly suited for the OVA format, you know?
Yeah.
It,
or
like
the Pocket, which is the 2-hour movie thing, just split up into those episodes.
Exactly. You know, and 8th MS Team is a show, when we'll talk about it next time, is a show that leaves you wanting more. I would take another 13 episodes of that any day of the week. By the time you get to Stardust Memory, they're crawling over the finish line. Those last 3 episodes feel, like, honestly, largely unnecessary, because episode 10 is the genuine climax of the show, and then 11, 12, 13 are just kind of a long, wet fart of an ending.
Yeah, and so it just ends up in this weird place where, yes, I think that is a big problem with it, is just it sort of extends, it has to extend some, like, kind of weaker plot threads over a really long period of time, and it makes them feel especially weak, and, like, the additional time they have to develop characters, it feels like it goes mostly wasted, largely because I feel like they make a bad mistake to kind of sideline Gato and his whole story for almost the entire middle section of the show till he comes back in the Nightmare of Solomon episode. So you just have this long stretch that is mostly just Kou and his supporting cast. And then once you hit the final 5 episodes or so, Gato comes back in, and then all of Kou's supporting cast just kind of stop being a factor in the series. And it just feels like, well, what was the point of spending all this fucking time on all these characters if they just don't even factor in literally in any way in the last 5 episodes?
Yeah, like all of those other, like, rival pilots on the ship who are like the hot shots, who their whole denouement is that they become Titans, which feels like that should have been a bigger deal, but it's not. It's like a little joke at the end of the show.
Yeah, which is the other problem with Stardust Memory is, like, I don't think it's obligated. It doesn't have to be the, like, story about how the Titans came to be, but that is what it is kind of, like, nominally trying to be. Like, it's not as if, like, people are accidentally interpreting it as being the, like, prequel to Zeta, because that's what it was supposed to be. Like, that's what it was marketed as. That was part of, like, the mission statement in sort of drafting out the series, is it was supposed to end with, and this is how the Titans were created. And it's like, well, that's an important enough event and an interesting enough event that you can imagine the show that does that with a lot of these same pieces and it being really interesting. But instead it ends up being a complete afterthought. And I think the deciding not to have the conclusion of your series about the creation of the Titans from the perspective of the Federation end with the protagonist of the show being a Titan, which they just conveniently avoid with Kou, I think that's a huge mistake. And it just feels kind of disappointing in that context.
But also, like, the Titans aren't even alluded to until, like, the final 3 episodes. Yes. Like, it's so out of the blue, and we'll talk about this with the ending, but what it does is it means the Titan stuff comes out of nowhere and has no time to develop, and it also renders the main characters of this series utterly superfluous, because Kou literally has nothing to do with the last. Like, he could have died in his fight with Anavel in episode 10, and that would be it. He does not impact the end of this series. Which is a choice. I don't know if it's a conscious choice, because it really feels like they forgot to write an ending and then scribbled it on napkins, but we'll get there. We'll get there, Sean. How do we want to take this from here? There are a lot of threads. I think one thing I want to kind of lay down is sort of like what the 3 overall threads of Stardust Memory are in my mind. because I think there's three main kind of thrusts to it. It is a coming-of-age story for Kou. Not a coming-of-age story quite in the way that the other Gundam boys' coming-of-age are, because he is already 19, but it is very clearly going from, like, boyhood to manhood and, like, discovering sex and girls and things like that. I think it's somewhat clumsily done, but that is clearly in here. Yeah. There is the rival pilots thing, and the rival pilots thing is frankly more heavy here than in any other Gundam I can think of other than Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt Gundam does it really heavily, because it's literally the two rivals in, like, even screen time. But this show is, like, sets that up in the first episode. The first theme song is called The Winner. The second theme song is called Men of Destiny. It is about these two locked in a deadly rivalry, you know? Like, even more so than, like you know, OG Gundam, Char is not front of mind for Amuro for large swaths of Gundam.
Yeah.
Anavel Gato is front of mind for Kou 100% of the time of Stardust Memory. It is about that rivalry, and they faceplant on that. We'll get that there later. And third, it is about Anavel Gato and about this like this guy who has a much, like, pure vision of the ideology of Zeon than I think we have seen before, certainly up to now in Gundam. And this guy who is trying to revive Zeon through this evil plot, this Stardust, this Operation Stardust plot. And I think those are overall the, like, three, like, avenues of the show. And I think it does none of them great in the aggregate. I enjoy the Anavel plot the most, but it also falls flat on that, I think, in the end, too, for reasons you were alluding to earlier, and that it winds up being weirdly nihilistic.
And I feel like the Gato side of the show is the side. This is the thing that surprised me on rewatching it, is I have such a big memory of Gato because he's a great character, and Aki Otsuka is a great voice actor. He brings so much to the character. But he's really not in the show that much. There's nowhere near as much Gato as I remembered, because I remembered it being sort of a fairly even thing. Like, I remember it's like, oh yeah, it's the rival thing, it's Kou, it's Gato, and it cuts between the two of them. They have their own stories going on. But that's really not it at all. Like, it is almost entirely Kou's perspective, and then you get occasional cutaways to Gato as he's doing his plan. But those are typically very brief, and you don't get a huge amount of actual insight into, like, Gato's backstory and stuff like that, which is particularly frustrating because that's what you really need if you want to do some of that Nina stuff at the end. You need some of what Gato's perspective is on all of that, and you don't get any of that. And so it feels like that side of the show, which is the most interesting, which is the part that I think, when it is done well, like it is in episodes 9 and 10, it is done really well, and it's the most interesting part. It's like, that's so good that like kind of hangs over in my memory, like what the show was, even if it's actually a pretty small part of it.
And it's the most unique thing this show has to offer, because Gundam at this point has done coming-of-age stories, it's done rival pilot stories. What it hasn't really done is the on-the-ground Zeon soldier perspective. And it's something that Gundam really wouldn't do heavily until Thunderbolt Gundam. The character from Zeon we spend the most time with in Tomino Gundam is Char, who is associated with them in such a weird way, you know, that, like, he's not Anavel Gato. He is not someone who is a true believer in this cause. He is in it for Char. And that's not what we have here. So, yeah, when they do it right, it's like, okay, this is really interesting, because there isn't this, I can't get this somewhere else. All the other stuff, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. But so, yeah, I think I basically agree with your assessment that those are the three main threads. And I would say it's kind of, I think the show starts off pretty strong. And then for that kind of like probably episodes 4-ish to about 7 it's really heavy on the coming of age stuff with Kou. And some of that's okay, because I do like Kelly a lot. And then the second half is where it starts moving back into the, okay, let's bring Gato in. Let's bring back the rivalry. And let's kind of try to refine what the bigger themes of the show are. And then after episode 10, it's just like, and we kind of did it. Now we got to do it again, only worse.
That's a very good way to put it. Absolutely. So where do we want to take it from here, Sean?
Let's start at the beginning, and I think talk about episode 1, because I do think episode 1 is very good. And in particular, so it starts with a prologue where, Gundam stuff after 0079 loves to do this. They love having prologues that take place either during the Battle of Solomon or, as we already see here, the Battle of OVA-a-thon. And I feel like, particularly now that I'm reading a little bit more Gundam manga here and there, I feel like that's every other Universal Century Gundam manga I've read starts with a flashback to the Battle of OVA-a-thon, and then it cuts to like 10 years later. Now here's where these characters are. But we start with OVA-a-thon. We get a little bit of Gato, who is characterized very specifically. It's fun watching it after playing Ghost of Tsushima, where you get a lot of this version of Akio Otsuka, where he's very much a Bushido, like he's modeled after the samurai kind of characters, where they're going with Gato. He's a true believer, man who like has honor, is willing like to die and give everything he has for this cause in a very like Bushi warrior kind of way. And you get that introduction, and then you cut to 4 years later, 0083. You're on Earth, and this is where we get Back to Paradise, which is the English language version of The Winner, which I like The Winner, the Japanese version. I like Back to Paradise even more. I think there's something about the flow of the lyrics in that song that just fucking kill. And you get a very good training montage, and it's the most OVA thing in all the Gundam OVAs. I talked about this with Endless Waltz, the Wing OVA, talked about this with 0080. There is a specific thing that to me is the OVA song that is like this late 80s, early 90s fucking bop that plays over some kind of montage. And it's like the Sonic the Hedgehog OVA, which came out as a movie over here, like has like all of these things from this period have this song. Back to Paradise is like the king of those songs, and the sequence is so good. And it was like, I just felt so happy watching the beginning of 0080. It just like, it just hits you with the OVA-ness of it, with this just incredibly luscious animation, with like, and this like great kind of like sort of transitional 80s to 90s techno rock kind of bop hit. It is very good.
Absolutely. And yeah, I go back and forth on whether or not I like Back to Paradise or The Winner more. I think they're both fucking great. I agree, I probably enjoy the kind of lyrical flow of the insert version more. And they use it it's phenomenally used here. It's used in one later episode, I think when they're training on the moon. And it's such a great fucking song, and it's such a great intro to the show of these guys out in the desert doing this big training exercise. Immediately kind of like, this show really does do a phenomenal job at like putting you in the place and time and like situation of the characters, and doing that here is that's a sequence that is like burned into my memory, whereas a lot of the middle of the show, as you say, is kind of a mush in my mind. I will never forget the like training montage at the beginning of Stardust Memory. It's so good.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Back to Paradise is a song that's so good that I just snuck it into an 80s music playlist on Spotify that I use when I play sometimes in my classroom. So whether they know it or not, there's about 100 teenagers in Colorado that have been well exposed to Back to Paradise. But I don't think any of them have any idea that it came from a weird anime from 1992. But
that's great.
Yeah, but I've been spreading the love of Back to Paradise. But yeah, like it just has this immediate tone to it that I think is very effective here, where it is, compared to War in the Pocket, which didn't have new types and had a little bit more of that sort of grounded military thing, but it was all through the eyes of this child protagonist. Here you have a similar no new types. It's all like military dudes, and it's very like military Top Gun movie kind of feel to it. And because you don't have that filter of a child protagonist, it like kind of has a lot of that testosterone to it, or like that testosterone fueled sense to the plotting, which I think in some places here, I think it works particularly well. I do think eventually they like kind of get away with themselves with it when they introduce the other Federation pilots that come in, and that gets a little bit obnoxious at some point because they redo the same bit over and over. But early on at this point, I think it does do such a good job of establishing its own niche within, particularly at the time, the Gundam media that was available, in telling a more straight military story that kind of got away from some of the normal tropes that you associate with Gundam from the main TV shows.
Yeah, and I mean, there are things I like about it and don't like. I think it fuels some really fucked gender politics in this show, which we'll get to, which it didn't have to, and that's one of the things that frustrates me about it. I do think there are things I like in how they handled it. Like, all the interactions between Lieutenant Burning, Keith, and Ko, I think are really good. consistently, like, scenes they have together. And it's why I really love episode 8, which is the one where he dies at the end. But, like, they really bring it back to him and his 2 trainees. And all of that stuff is just very well done.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that is that. It's like that core 3 characters, with like Lieutenant Burning as like the old gruff instructor who's trying to sort of like pass on everything he's learned to these 2 young bucks. Like that is a tale as old as time, but it works pretty well when they start hitting it. And then you get a point. So that's, we have Nina and all those characters to get introduced. But there's a point in episode 1 that on rewatching it, I was really curious, having now knowing what they do at the end. And because I remembered that Gato like physically comes in when Nina is there and he steals one of the Gundams. Because they have the 2 experimental Gundams there that they're there to test because everyone's a test pilot. Gato shows up to steal one of them because one of them is armed with nuclear weapons. I remembered that Nina was there. I was like, surely they must have done something there that when you rewatch the show, you see the building blocks in a similar way that when you rewatch 0079, the original Mobile Suit Gundam, in episode 1, if you now know that Hayato and Fraubo eventually are in a relationship, if you watch Hayato when he pulls up outside Amara's house and talks to Frau, like there are specific little things that they hang on for brief moments that show you that Hayato has a crush on her that you're not going to pick up on your first viewing because you don't know any of the characters. I thought there'd be something like that because it is a let's say, monumentally more important plot detail here than Hayato having a crush on Fraubo was in Mobile Suit Gundam. But there is nothing. She is there. She's in the fucking hangar. She sees in person, physically, Gato walks in and like walks up and looks at the fucking Gundam GPO2. She sees him and she's like, hey, you stay away from there. Gato looks up and looks at her. They see each other in the flesh. And nobody reacts. There's no verbal comment. There's no, like, facial expressions. There's nothing. And then Gato steals the fucking Gundam, and then the rest of the plot starts. And, like, I was utterly blown away. I did not expect at all that it was so not set up that even knowing that that twist was going to eventually come later in the story, that they had in a relationship previously, that I wonder if at some point, and I could not confirm this anywhere, that was a thing that they had never envisioned originally for the story and they put in later, because it is so not alluded to at all in this first episode.
It's not alluded to at all until the specific moment they start deciding that it will be a thing. Like, I 100% believe that was not planned, because it is so inorganic to everything the story is about. It so throws a wrench in those, like, main 3 things we were talking about, of the main 3 threads of the show, because it has nothing to do with any of them and just fucks all of them over. It feels like something like when they start alluding to it in the second half of the series is when they decided that. I do not believe, making episode 1, that they had that in mind. I just don't think so.
Yeah, and my mind was blown, because I just, like, It was one of the things I was most excited about rewatching Stardust Memory, was to see, it's like, surely they did more to set that up than I caught, because it just, to me, my memory of the first time watching it, I was just like so sideswiped by that revelation that I was like, what the fuck are you even talking about? I think the way they handle it after they do the twist is even more perplexing. But yes, I was very surprised upon rewatching episode 1 that most of episode 1 I think is very good. But knowing where the story goes, it is very confusing to me that there is no work done to set up that twist whatsoever.
Yeah, but putting that aside, episode 1 is very good, and episode 1 also has a fucking great title, Gundam Jack. I fucking love that title.
Yeah, so there's Gundam Jack here, and then later in the series they talk about colony jacking multiple times, about stealing a colony, which is also a very good Gundam word.
Gundam Jack sounds like it could be like its own series about dudes who go around stealing Gundams. I'd watch that.
I would definitely watch that.
It's a video game. It's Gundam's version of Grand Theft Auto. You can just walk around a big, like, space environment and steal Gundams and go around in them. I don't know how that would work, but you could do that. But yeah, episode 2, like I said, I think is great. That's the one where they are searching for the Gundam. They are following Gato, and I think that's probably the best overall episode of the series. Yeah, this was the one that I had the strongest memory of, other than some of the bullshit at the end. Because yes, it is, to me, it is like when I first watched Stardust Memory, because I guess we should say that, like, Stardust Memory, generally speaking, is pretty well regarded in the fandom. I think there are, like, it is
not universally beloved, but in both in Japan and over here, like it's generally really well liked. I think most people agree that the ending stuff is not good, but they it doesn't bother other people as much as maybe it does us. But episode 2 to me was like a blueprint of what this show should have been, which is it is very kind of action focused overall, but it's very tense and it uses the animation quality really effectively to show us a kind of action sequence of them kind of going through this foggy area trying to track down this Gundam. And I feel like that whole sequence would be a lot harder to do effectively on a TV budget. Whereas if you can do like all the animation around the fog and the mist, and like the colors are so striking and very unique looking, this very kind of like early dawn kind of bluish green color scheme they have for that episode. It just uses the OVA format really, really effectively. And it's a nice tense scene that then sets up for you like kind of the dynamic between Gato and Kou, where Gato, like, interestingly enough, kind of just leaves Kou alive, kind of seeing that, like, there's no real reason from Gato's perspective to kill this one Earth Federation dude. It's more important to keep the Gundam safe, and it sets up that animosity that Kou has, this feeling of inadequacy that he develops that I think is kind of the defining trait of the character. I think is really well set up here in episode 2 with that kind of confrontation they have.
Well, yeah, it's that confrontation. There's another guy that's with them, Lieutenant Allen, who gets killed. Yeah. And there's a lot of like chaos in the episode. You know, Burning breaks his leg, and then he has a cast on for much of the rest of the show. And there's all this good stuff there where like they are chasing through the fog and they are at a distinct disadvantage because these are, you know, 2 rookies and an old dude, and Gato is like an actual like genuine ace pilot hero who is outsmarting them at every step. And it's just a really good cat and mouse game episode. I also love the title of episode 2, Endless Pursuit. It's very good.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like a lot more what 08th MS Team eventually is.
Yes.
And like 8 years later when that comes out. Because it is way more built off of the model of most episodes of 08th MS Team feel more like it's an Endless Pursuit type thing where they come up with a broad action set piece premise and build an episode around that and develop characters around that, rather than the rest of Stardust Memory is a bit more kind of structured more or less the way you would structure a Gundam TV show. But here they kind of stick to this nice, like, everything feels focused around this one pursuit at the heart of the episode.
I like the 3rd episode too. I don't love the other like hotshot pilots who are in the show a ton, but I think in this one episode where they come in and are just dickheads, and you wind up having this kind of like this fight between them for like control of Gundam Unit 1. It's the Top Gun Gundam stuff like at its like strongest in the entire series probably is in episode 3. And I think it's not my favorite part of the show, but I do think the like paintball match that Kou has with Lieutenant Monsha, Bernard Monsha, yes. The names in the show are very good, is a really good and well-animated action sequence. And overall, I enjoy that episode.
Yeah, I like that episode as well. I think the thing that happens, though, is that episode sets up the dynamic with Lieutenant Monsha. And it's well executed within that episode. And I think having the, like, here's this just asshole, sexist piece of shit, womanizing pilot comes in, and is really cocky, and Kou kind of has to prove himself against him. And Kou is kind of partially successful at that, although maybe not all the way. I think that is a good plot for an episode and a good dynamic to have for Kou, and to get that Top Gun military dude bro vibe you want from the show in terms of what the premise is. The problem is that then it repeats that for the next like 3 episodes, and it's like every time that Monsha character appears in the first half of the show from that point on, it is the exact same shtick over and over and over again, and it ends up feeling in episode 3, I think you can give credit to the series as saying like, okay, like it's using this as a way to be critical of this like very like militaristic patronizing attitude and sexist attitude this character has. When they just repeat that shtick over and over again, it just feels like, okay, you're not as interested in kind of dissecting that and taking that apart, rather than you're just having fun like replicating that on the screen.
Yes, I agree with all of that, and I think, yeah, on its own, episode 3, really good. when it's something that they just keep repeating ad nauseum and never really get over, and then Lieutenant Monsha never like gets the denouement of like, I actually think the idea of having that character be the one who becomes a Titan could be a really powerful way to like kind of end the series and show like who is in power now. But it's this like little kiss off thing at the end after we don't see him for 4 episodes. So they don't do well with that character. The 4th episode is the last major one on Earth. And I like this one as well. It's a pretty Gato-centric one because he arrives at this base in Africa, and basically the people at that base are helping him get off of Earth and are like sacrificing themselves for the Zeon cause. And I like that side of it very much. It's kind of the last Gato-centric episode we have for a while.
Yeah, although I think like outside of the Gato stuff, that one is... that's the one where when I got to episode 4, I was like, oh... this is an episode that's also in the show. Like, I just completely... this is one whose entire existence I had forgotten about, because it does feel like it does some useful stuff for Gato, but it ends up feeling like a little bit of a filler episode to me, which is kind of like a lot of what this whole section of the show sort of just feels like.
Yeah. Episode 5, which has a great title, Gundam to the Sea of Stars, is obviously the one where they go to space. And this is the one where the big thing that happens in this episode is that Kou goes out in the Gundam Unit 2. Is his Unit 2 or is...
No, his is
Gato's?
Unit 1.
Okay, his is Unit 1. And he takes it out, even though it has been well explained to him on multiple occasions that Gundam Unit 1 is not equipped for space combat. It cannot fight in space. And right before he goes out in Gundam Unit 1, they are preparing another mobile suit that is prepared for space combat, and that you would assume Kou, as a test pilot, would have no problem piloting and could go solve the situation. And instead, because Nina looks at him funny, he goes out in Gundam Unit 1 and gets completely fucking destroyed. And it's a very well animated and choreographed and directed sequence, because everything in this show is. But it does start the trend of what I like to call Kou is a fucking dumbass, or Kou is a big old dum-dum, because he is a big old dum-dum, and he continues to be a big old dum-dum the whole show. He's just not very smart.
Yeah, so this is where you run into one of the problems with the series, which is I think it copy and pastes a little bit too much from traditional Gundam shows onto a format and like a structure and set of characters that do not copy as cleanly over. Because this is a thing where if this was Amuro, or this was Camille, or Judo, or Garrod from Afterward Gundam X, absolutely, I could see those characters doing this. Where yes, it's the first time they're out in space. The Gundam GPO-1 is not outfitted. It needs the full Werner version, which looks fucking rad and is a very good Gundam design. But they don't have the fucking, jets basically on it for it to control well in space. And Kou is just so insistent on, he's like doing all the calculations and all this shit because Nina is not giving him the calculations, because she's like, if I give him the calculations, he'll go and take out the Gundam. I think she really quickly realizes how like fucking stupid that thing is. Like, probably if he just gets the calculations, then he'll be like, okay, cool, I can test run the Gundam. And then if we get in a fight, I'll use the one that then, since I've tested it, I'll actually use an actual fucking thing that works in space. I don't know why really Nina holds back the fucking weird calculations or whatever the bullshit is going on.
This is where all the Nina Kou stuff starts getting so annoying to me. It's so bad in this episode. We'll do a whole segment on Nina later, but
yeah. We should just do that as a thing once we've run through these episodes. But yeah, so it's that whole side of it is just very weird, and it would make sense if it was a 15-year-old kid who was thrown into this situation that didn't know what was going on, was only fighting for desperately for their survival, which is what the standard Gundam protagonist setup is. Because this is not this exact scenario, but broadly speaking, this is a very common early Gundam episode trope that you get, where whether they're in space or whatever, the pilot of the Gundam boy, is really bullheaded about using the Gundam in a way that doesn't work properly, or they get too cocky and too arrogant. And then they end up fucking up and something bad happens. That happens in every single Gundam thing, usually a couple times in the first 15 or so episodes. But it works because they're 15-year-old kids who are in over their shit and have, that have an overestimated sense of themselves because they're teenagers. Whereas Kou is, he's not a fully grown man. He's not in his mid-20s or something, but he's supposed to be 19. I think he reads as a little bit older than that to me. And he's a test pilot. He's a member of the military. This is a guy who has voluntarily joined the Earth Federation military after the 1 Year War, has piloting experience, has all this stuff. Like, you know, he's not even just a pilot, he's a test pilot. He's someone who's performed well enough in, like, the Earth Federation version of the Air Force Academy that they allow him to pilot experimental, high-end, like, bespoke prototype mobile suits. Like, that's who this character is. And for him to have this attitude feels like it doesn't gel with the broad backstory we have for him. And I think that's a big problem with Kou, is that they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. They both want the protagonist to be an older character that isn't a magic new type boy, so that they can feel like it's more mature or whatever, so that they can have him be older. And at the same time, they want to run through the exact same narrative beats you would with a standard Gundam boy protagonist, even when I don't think that that works when the character is older.
No, and I actually think it's interesting, like, contemporaneous with this series is Gundam F91. And Gundam F91 has Seabook, who is like 17 or 18, so he's also a little older than your typical Gundam boy. And they just, like, not that Gundam F91 has the time to get super in-depth with its characters, but it, like, does that side of it so much better, I feel like, because it does not, it actually feels like it kind of adjusts the tropes to the age of the character, and Seabook feels, like, fairly natural within that world. And yeah, Kou feels like he is 19 or 20, but at heart, he's, like, fucking 12. Like, he has, like, just, we'll talk about this later, but, like, some of the decisions he makes, like, around Nina and stuff, it feels like he has, like he's supposed to be significantly younger, like, the age of, like, having no experience talking to girls. Like, it's very weird.
Yes, yeah, when he's, like, trying to give her the tickets or whatever, and it's again, if this was Garo trying to do this scene with Tifa in After We're Gonna Mex,
perfect,
absolutely.
No problem.
Yeah, 100%. He's an awkward 15-year-old boy who legitimately has never really talked to girls his age. Kou is, you know, again, he graduated from a fucking military academy. You know, for fuck's sake, dude. Like, come on. It's just like some of... And, you know, we don't really get much insight into Kou's backstory. That's never, like, an area that they go, necessarily. But it's like, it just feels like the way the character looks and is supposed to be, based on what you understand the character's meant to have gone through to be where he is, doesn't match up with the what you see. And this is maybe episode 5, honestly, I think is, like, the most clear example of that, because it very much feels like they just took an unused script idea from another Gundam show and just put Kou in the pilot position for it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you read, I reference this all the time, the Tomino novelization of the original Mobile Suit Gundam, where, if you don't know, one of the many changes made from the original series in the novelization is that he ages up Amuro a little bit, and he makes him a cadet and all the characters basically are cadets, so, like, they are just at the beginning of their training, but they are part of the Earth Federation, so, like, Amuro has a little bit of experience as a pilot, and it goes through a lot of these same beats where it is much more explicitly about coming of age via sex, and, like, Amuro losing his virginity and having his first experience with women, and it does it very well, in part because they adjust it, and Amuro is not written exactly as he's written in the show, and it's basically doing the Stardust Memory stuff, but, like, with an internal logic that makes sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, episode 6 is an episode that both times I've watched it, I've liked the concept of it a little bit more than the execution. It's the Warrior of Von Braun. It's where they're on the Luna colony, the Von Braun city on the moon. They're doing the full Vernier upgrades. Kou gets beat up and winds up leaving, and then he meets this dude who we find out later is a Zeon soldier who's, like, lost an arm, and he's building this big Volvaro mobile armor. And then at the end, Kou decides to, like, help him finish it, even though they're on opposite sides. And I like the, like, last 10 minutes of this episode, but there's just, I don't know, there's just something about, like, I never feel like it fully uses, it's such a good idea for an episode, and I think it gets sidetracked by some other stuff. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm with you that it does have the makings of a really good mid-episode. Like, this is, like, I think this arc, the Kou and Kelly stuff between episode 6 and episode 7, are the best the, like, coming of age stuff for Kou gets. It feels like the most authentic, where it's like, I can kind of see more where Kou is coming from and some of the difficulties he's having a little bit better than I do in, like, episodes 4 or 5. But yeah, I think you're right that it just doesn't fully land what it's going for. One thing I do like about this is it just weirdly reminds me of Kukuru's Doan's Island from Mobile Suit Gundam, the episode that's not in any of the official releases. There's something about Kelly in this that just has a real big Doan energy to me, and I don't think that's intentional, but I really like it. But yeah, like I think it does have some really great moments, and it is, I don't remember if it's episode 6 or episode 7, but in one of these episodes is where you get the montage, where
It's 6.
you have, I was saying, yeah. So in episode 6, you have the montage, which is set to the ending theme for the first half of the show, which is Magic by Jacob Wheeler, which is a great ending theme. And it is like one of the most explicitly romantic songs in the history of Gundam. That it's like, I mean, because the lyrics of the song are about the singer who has had a like one night stand kind of like fling relationship with some character that it seems like maybe like the person and the other person of the song, like they have this very like kind of on and off again physical relationship, but the singer wants something real. They want the magic of a real relationship and something that's more deep and romantic and personal. And that's what the song lyrics are about, and in English, which leads me to believe that maybe the animators didn't realize like just how romantic the connotation was, because, and this is where I like, obviously there's no world in which this would have ever happened, especially in fucking 1991-92. But I would have loved the Stardust Memory. That is a totally different show at this point. We're at the halfway point. Kou realizes that the weird relationship thing he's got with Nina just isn't working. It's just not what he needs in life. And then you have this young, hotshot and kind of, but still kind of timid Federation test pilot who runs into the older, more experienced, kind of, you know, daddy-esque ex-Zeon pilot who is injured. He's lost his arm, but is determined. And he's got the one thing that Kou doesn't have, that he has this ideology and he's determined to see it through in this real belief. And Kou at first confronts him and is kind of confused and upset. But he just can't seem to get away from it and get the idea of like who Kelly is out of his head. And for whatever reason, Kou is just compelled to help Kelly, even though they are pilots on the opposite side of the war. That is the most homoerotic fucking thing in the history of Gundam. A series that has multiple actual gay characters. We've already had one with Gwen in Turn A Gundam, but it never gets as fucking hot and heavy as it does here in 0083. And it would be so much better. And Kou would be such a better character if this was the relationship he had. And Jonathan, I just want to read out the lyrics to Magic by Jacob Wheeler.
I was about to sing them, so please, go ahead. I know this song back of my hand.
I'm going to read them out because I do want people, like, if you know, maybe you didn't rewatch Stardust Memory for this episode that you're listening to us, like, talk about it. You only remember vaguely what I'm saying. Just picture, you know, Kou and this older buff Zeon dude, and they're both working together on this mobile armor on a montage. Some of the montage including shots like Kou riding on Kelly's shoulders to like reach a place up top. Like it's very physically intimate. So it's like, this is straight up, I have no idea. I would love to know who like came up with this sequence and like whether or not they really understood what they're putting on screen, because it's really good. But all of that is happening while you're hearing these lyrics in English. Don't come to me just 'cause you're lonely tonight. Lonely's only part of your game. As long as you live, you must remember one thing. Give and take are one in the same. So tell me, are you ready? Really, really ready? I don't want your love for one night. 'Cause I'm not looking for a love affair. I need the magic when I hold you near. It's more important than a one-night stand. I need the magic when I touch your hand.
And I also just like, Magic is such a great, unique song. We touched on it a little bit with Gundam X, Afterwar Gundam X, because the song in
Human Touch.
Human Touch I think is like an even better version of this, but they're both sort of this like 80s ballad, and Magic even more explicitly, Magic is a Michael Jackson song. Like it is just straight up, it is like one of the ballads from Off the Wall or Thriller. It is really like one of those. It is produced like one of those. Jacob Wheeler sings in kind of a similar register. He is like almost to the level of doing a Michael Jackson impression. And it's really interesting that way. But so it has this like, it is this over the top like 80s love song. And yes, when you get it in that sequence at the end of this episode of Stardust Memory, and because it's also like just to set the scene for like, it is such a well-directed sequence, because this whole episode has a lot of like kind of Blade Runner homages in the like cityscape with like the lights in the darkness kind of on the horizon. Very much looks like it's out of Blade Runner. But the way that sequence starts is Kou is going back to the ship, and he runs into Nina, who has been looking for him, and Nina is like trying to coax him back, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna come back. Tell them I'm coming, but there's something I have to do tonight. And then magic kicks in, and those words Sean is saying go as he runs through this night with these lights in the background, and he comes up on Kelly, and he's like, I'm gonna help you, Kelly. And then they're riding around on each other's shoulders and taking their shirts off and getting sweaty. It's yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's really good, and it's particularly, again, I just don't know if any of the people animating this sequence like knew that they would hear a man like soulfully belt out the words "one night stand" over this sequence, which is like what some of the most like sexually explicit lyrics in any Gundam song. It's like, it's a song literally about people having sex and then like trying to seek a more like spiritually or romantically fulfilling relationship with each other, which is great. I just wish that the show actually like legitimately leaned into that, because I think it is such a better character dynamic than what they have with fucking Kou and Nina, which is the main romantic subplot in the show, which sucks.
And it's terrible.
Yeah. Or you can have the one that like you only get this one hint of it in this section of the show where it's Keith and what's her name, Mora, the like really kind of buff, bigger engineer lady that's kind of Nina's friend. Like, you get this one scene where apparently they go on a date, and that never comes up again. That is also a way more interesting romantic character pairing than Kou and Nina, and it's just really frustrating.
Episode 7 with Shining Blue Fire is basically part 2 of this, because it is Kelly delivers the Volvaro to Zeon, but then they don't want him to pilot it, and he gets really mad, so he takes it and challenges Kou so he can like prove his worth to Zeon. And so Kou goes out and fights him in the Gundam. This is where we get really heavy into Nina's main character trait for the second half of Stardust Memory, which is being a quivering hysteric. I don't know how else to say it, but like she just goes on into full like Victorian literature hysteria of like cannot control her body, crying, weeping. She like literally like jumps into the anti-gravity of the big like Gundam chamber and like throws herself in front of the Gundam as Kou is trying to get out and almost dies. And it's the most ludicrous, sexist, awful bullshit. When I say she is the worst character in Gundam, that is true even without the twist at the end. She is like unbearable to watch in scenes like this, because it is such a far cry from the like complex, nuanced human emotions Tomino gives women in all of his Gundam work. It's just a complete and utter caricature that should get laughed out of like the scripting phase, let alone animated and voice acted and everything.
Yeah, and this is the section of the show where you get the first, and I don't think there's much like you could know about this without seeing the show all the way through for the first time and knowing that they're going to do the Gato thing at the end with her. But this is the first time where there's some sort of vague implication, because she knows who Kelly is, and there's no reason that the audience knows for why she would know who Kelly is, and so that's why she like goes out there. And so it's the first piece of foreshadowing outside. There's like a line in episode 6 that one of her friends has about like, you had a romantic relationship that didn't go well. Maybe you should be in a romantic relationship again. But other than that, which is only the vaguest sense of a foreshadowing, this is the first time, episode 7 at the midpoint, episode 7 of 13, where that twist that she had a relationship with Gato is foreshadowed or set up or alluded to in any significant way, which is way too late. And it's one of the things that it just feels like it kills her character, because she has to, it's like part of like what that plot choice does is it forces her character into this weird hysteric role where she's like pulled between two sides, and it just kind of exposes part of the problem with Stardust Memory in general, which is that none of the main characters on like the Earth Federation side have any sense of like a belief in something or like an ideology. They don't really have much of a motivation. Like I have a hard time understanding what Nina's perspective on the world is, because it's like it's easy to assume when you just have like the basic characterization that she's like a engineer who then falls in love with a soldier dude. It's pretty easy to just sort of like roll with that, and you don't have to give a lot more detail, and it's kind of fine. But once you start doing something way more complex, like she's torn between these are like allegiances on both sides, well, then you need to understand what an allegiance means to Nina as a character, and there's nothing with that. It's a similar problem that they have with Kou, where they never give Kou much of what feels like a concrete like motivation for anything outside. He just kind of doesn't like Gato and wants to prove himself, which I don't think sustains his character for the full series.
Especially because like this is a show about someone in Gato fighting for a deeply held personal belief. And like so because of that, Zeon's ideology is the only ideology we hear about in Stardust Memory. We never hear about like what the Federation is affirmatively fighting for. And you could make that into a point that like the Federation has no ideology other than perpetuating itself, which is true. But like Kou does not ever have to grapple with that or realize it. It's just he's fighting Gato because Gato is the enemy, and that's which is not good enough for a story.
Yeah, and it starts coming to a head here where you realize that they're never going to pay off any of that stuff, because that is something that the show in episodes like 2 and 3 bring up. When Kou and Gato encounter each other, they have like a brief conversation, and the main thing that Gato says is like, I'm never going to lose to someone who doesn't believe in anything. Like, what are you even fighting for? And Kou doesn't have an answer or a response to that, which is another Gundam cliche. Every Gundam protagonist has that moment. It's usually a little bit later in the series where they encounter an enemy, and then they are actually like interrogated for like, well, what are you really fighting for? Because most Gundam protagonists are fighting for their own survival out of desperation, because that's the standard setup. And for other Gundam shows that works fine, because that's the turning point. That's where you get to have the story arc in Afterward Gundam X, where Garou learns what politics are, and he gets to like express an ideology and develop one of his own. But the problem with 0083 is that Kou is not a 16-year-old kid or a 15-year-old kid who is thrown into this situation and has to desperately fight to survive because he's a new type and he's one of the only people who can pilot this like experimental Gundam as well, enough to be able to like get out of this crazy situation, which is the standard Gundam setup. There, for survival is enough of an ideology and a motivation for those characters to sustain them for a significant chunk of the series until they can make it more complex than that. With Kou, you are a person who decided to join the Earth Federation military. Like, you have to have something more than that, because you're not in a, like, if you don't fight, you won't survive kind of scenario. And I think, like, once you get to this midpoint of the show, you've expected, about from since that was set up in episode 2, you'd expect around this point you would start hitting those notes and kind of like trying to pay that off in some way. And it seems like almost with some of the Kelly stuff, they're like getting there by having Kou encounter someone who's from Zeon and maybe talking to them. But then they never really pay it off, and then it just kind of, I feel, gets swept under the rug past this point, and it easily just gets sort of dismissed once the colony drop enters into the thing, because it's just like, oh, we just have to stop the colony drop because it would kill a lot of people, and you don't actually have to think about it anymore, and it's profoundly disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, while we're on this topic, Sean, I have some thoughts on this that I wrote in my notes that I wanted to talk about, which is like just the issue of motivation in general. Yeah. You know, one of the reasons Gato is the strongest character in this show, beyond having Akio Otsuka and that incredible character design, and he pilots one of the coolest Gundams in the whole franchise, is he's highly motivated. Like, he is a Zeon true believer. He is an actual, like, hero pilot. Like, I wrote in my notes, Anavel Gato is the real version, the genuine article of what Char Aznable cosplays as. Like, yes. Char Aznable cosplays, dresses himself as the guy who Anavel Gato actually is. Char does not actually believe in the Zeon cause, at least in original Gundam, to a real degree. He is there for facetious reasons to get revenge, but he is dressing himself in the lens of like the hero pilot who believes in the cause. Gato is that guy, and he can actually inspire people, and he believes, and like, I get the sense that he probably didn't even care for the Zabi family that much. He probably thought they were fucking blowhards. What he's here for is Space Noid independence, and he will die for that, right?
Yeah.
And that, I think, they get that across really well, that like he is there for actually pretty pure ideological reasons, and you can respect that on the level of generally when people seem to have a strong motivation that is understandable, you can kind of, not necessarily you have to agree with it, but you can get behind the idea of ideas, but that creates a fundamental imbalance in the story, because Kou is not that guy, and is never really even designed to be that guy. I think he could in other versions of the story, but his main things are, will I ask Nina out? And can I beat this strong pilot? But that's not what Gato doesn't care about beating Kou. Like, that's his goal, is bringing down the Earth Federation and freeing Space Noids. And so you have this fundamental mismatch of motivations. And you need motivations in a story. If you have a big protagonist and antagonist, motivations need to be at a similar pitch. They do not need to be the same motivation, but they need to be pitched in similar directions. Gundam 79, the original Gundam, actually does this really well, I think, with Amuro and Char, and that these are also two highly motivated characters, but they're motivations that take time to unravel and determine themselves. With Char, because he is secretive and there are twists around him, and with Amuro, because he is a boy who is like growing up and is coming into a sense of his own motivations, right? And so those two sets of parallel motivations are pitched at a similar level. 0083, as I alluded to earlier, ends up with this problem at the end where Kou, and to an extent even Gato, does not matter at the end of the story, but like Kou really has nothing to do at the end of the story, because it is the colony laser and the Titans that stop this thing. Kou has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. And Gato has something to do with that because he's firing the colony, but Kou is just useless, and he could have died in episode 10 and it would turn out the same. And one of the things in media criticism today is there's this stupid meme that people do about Indiana Jones, about Raiders of the Lost Ark, of like, oh, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a bad story because if Indiana hadn't been there, nothing would have been different. And it is such a poor reading of these basic, like, tenets of storytelling I'm laying out. Because the whole point of Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you do that, like, similar pitches of motivation, is Indiana, he is one of the Raiders. He wants to possess this thing. Belloc, the antagonist, also wants to possess this thing, and they are in a pitched battle for possession that culminates in an ending where Indiana finishes a character arc and distinguishes himself by relinquishing the act of possession and refusing to look, and that is how it completes itself as a story, and it's a very smart story that keeps those motivations in pitch. And 0083 has no reason for that. There's nothing Kou learns that makes him useless at the end of the story. He just is never motivated. And so when you get there, there's nothing to do. Other people are taking care of it. And Gato is still interesting because he has some ideas. So that's kind of my spiel, but this is a big problem in this show. And I agree. I think this episode 6 and 7, which are, like the whole show, really well directed. They're beautifully animated. Episode 7 has one of my favorite shots in all of Gundam at the end, where he lands on the moon and he jumps out and he gets Nina, and the Gundam is out there on the moon with its hand outstretched, and it's like in a kneeling position. And I have that as one of my desktop wallpapers. It's an incredible shot. It's very entertaining to watch. But you can also feel in episode 6 and 7, this was, to borrow a phrase from later in this series, the point of no return. This is where, like, you were either going to kick into this story and start motivating Kou, or you weren't. And they don't, because even in killing Kelly, this guy he had this wonderful romantic night with, he never comes into any sense of ideology or politics or why he has a purpose on this, not Earth, but moon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's frustrating about it on top of that is that, generally speaking, Kou's motivation, his strongest motivating factor as a character is his own sense of, like, emasculation and inadequacy around his relationship with Nina. That's why they introduced the Muncho character, and he's just, like, the most, like, ridiculous, over-the-top, like, dude bro pilot guy you could possibly have, is as a contrast for Kou. And then that's also Gato. And so they have that, and that is like, that's a totally fine motivation if that's what your story is going to do. But if that's what your story is going to do, that's the motivation in story that if Kou never overcomes that, and he doesn't for the whole series, that's the motivation that ends up with him being a Titan, right? That he's not motivated by ideology or politics. He's motivated by this need to be more powerful. and that ends in fascism. That is what fascism effectively is. It's like that would be a great way then to start layering in some of the Titan stuff instead of just punting it off to be like the post-credit scene, which is more or less what it is of the whole season or the whole show. And it's really frustrating because I do think that they have some like good material if they wanted to do the this is how the Titans are created thing, and they just don't. So they end up kind of not doing that, and then they also just don't end up then pivoting to make Kou a more compelling, likable, motivated protagonist that you want to follow, because a protagonist motivated by their own sense of inadequacy is not going to take you for the entire stretch of a story. Like eventually, that's like Naruto. Naruto starts out that's his entire motivation for like the first section of that show, and then eventually he gets over it. Because if the entire story of Naruto was just this character feeling like, I want to be the Hokage, I want to be the best of the best because everyone's treated me like shit and I want to prove myself, that motivation doesn't carry a character all the way through to the conclusion. That's the motivation for a character for like the first act of a story, not for the full thing.
Right. Exactly. Episode 8, Conspiracy Sector, is one I really like on an island on its own. I think it's a good, well-constructed episode. It's the one where Lieutenant Burning dies at the end, and I think the entire way they construct Burning's death sequence, they definitely layer on the foreshadowing very thick, where like the episode starts with Burning talking to Captain Synapse, which, oh god, the names in this show are so good, about how his wife has left him and he's sad, but he's got these 2 trainees. And then a lot of the episode is about how he's finally realizing his trainees are like growing up and they don't need him as much anymore. And so they basically do all but the Simpsons joke of like, I've bought a boat with my wife and I'm retiring tomorrow and it's called the Live Forever. And then he gets shot in the head. That's basically what they do with Burning. But I think the way they do that whole sequence where at the end, like Burning goes out with his test pilots and he participates in the fight against it's Chima, right? The Zeon lady, yeah. So he fights with Zeon lady, crazy pirate lady, and they have this fight, and he wins pretty decisively, but he takes this one hit to his armor, to the Gundam he's in. And then he retrieves this briefcase that he finds in the debris that has like all the details of Operation Stardust, and they're heading back to the ship with Kou and with Keith, and they're all reminiscing. And while they're doing that, we keep getting these in a very like Alfred Hitchcock fashion of you show the bomb under the desk, that something like the shot that he took to the mobile suit fired something in the mechanics, and it's starting to short out. And it keeps getting worse and worse, and then his suit just explodes, and Kou and Keith can't save him. I think that is one of the best, like, individually constructed sequences in, maybe not in all of Gundam, because there's so many good ones, but just it's a phenomenal, as a death sequence, it's a really well-constructed death sequence, and I think the way it just kind of hits and lands, and then the episode sort of ends on hanging on that, is really impressive, and I do love the construction. It's a testament to how well directed and boarded and everything this show is. It's just a really well put together episode, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely one of my favorite episodes, and yes, that sequence in particular, I do find it utterly hilarious that he finds this briefcase with all the and it's like he starts to read out the plans, and he's like, "Oh, it's Operation Stardust, and they're going to be at the Solomon." And Kou keeps like asking these questions. And Gato, what's Gato? He's like about to say like the last like critical piece of information is like, "I can't believe it. Oh my God, for Operation Stardust, they're going to," and then he explodes, and it's like that part's they maybe put it a little bit over the top because it's kind of like hilariously convenient that he has like he just found the fucking briefcase with all the plans in it. But yes, other than that, maybe slightly over the top, it is a absolutely phenomenal sequence of like direction and editing, and it hits on that character relationship from the first 3 or 4 episodes that is some of the best character stuff in the show, which is Kou, Keith, and Lieutenant Burning and their whole thing together. And I think it's like a good way to end that character arc. Is he has to die because he's the old dude and he's one day from retirement or whatever, and then he dies and leaves his legacy for Kou and Keith to carry on. Like, it's all really well executed in that sense.
Yeah, and I just also like there is no other Gundam death that does it quite this way, where I love the idea of And of course this would happen. This happens in real life militaries all the time, where you took a hit in the wrong place and something goes wrong and no one realizes it, and then there is a malfunction that leads to death, right? And I love that the like aromanticism of it. He does not die in a blaze of glory. He dies because the bullet just terrible chance hit the wrong part of his suit and no one knows. That's almost something that I wish we saw a little more of, because it's such an interesting, like, terrible dynamic, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
really good. Episodes 9 and 10 are where we get back to Gato. We have this big fight where the entire Axis fleet is coming into the Earth. You have the Federation fleet is kind of getting together for this big naval review on Konpei Island, right? Which is what used to be Solomon.
Yes.
And so they're getting around Solomon. You have our little Haman Karn cameo here with the Axis fleet, which was not nearly enough Haman Karn for me taste, but at least we saw her.
Yes, it was. I really wish that we had a scene of Haman Karn and Gato together, because that would have been good. But getting some Haman Karn is better than getting no Haman Karn.
Absolutely, yes. This is an easy rule for life. But so you have all the players kind of getting into place, and throughout this whole episode, Gato is like moving around the fleet and getting into position, and we don't know what for, but like he is moving around everybody, and he and the Delaz fleet are successfully outsmarting everybody until he gets into position. And while he's getting into position, Kou and Keith have like picked up his trail and are almost on him, but then he pulls out that fucking ginormous nuclear bazooka from the shield of his Gundam in one of the just best pieces of Gundam animation in the entire franchise. Is him pulling that out and putting it into position. Like, the number of like frames of animation is so good, Sean.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And just the way it like slots in and like all the shit starts spinning and lights turn on. Yeah, it's just it's the mechanical design of it is incredibly gratifying to see animated at that like incredible level of fidelity.
And then he fires on the fleet. We don't know, that's where that episode ends, but he fires basically screaming that he is, this is revenge for Solomon or for Abawaku, and he becomes the nightmare of Solomon once again. And then we find out that the nuclear strike destroyed 2/3 of the Federation fleet. And then in episode 10, coming right off of that, we get basically the last big fight between Gato and Kou, where they have this big pitched battle that I think is just one of the best animated pieces of fight animation in all of Gundam. It's also just really well choreographed and meaty, and it is so good. It ends with both of the suits taking such damage that the pilots have to flee. And there's another one of my favorite shots in the whole series is basically the Gundams drawn basically as a background layer. They're like hyper detailed, while Gato and Kou just dive out of the suits and then they start exploding. 9 and 10 are probably the peak. I think episode 2 is the best overall episode, but in terms of peak of like, I'm really enjoying this, 9 and 10, especially coming off 8, is so good also. Is like, man, I wish more of the show was like this. This is really good.
Yeah, it just has that great like Gundam naval combat kind of thing to it, of the tactics and strategies of what Gato and his fleet are doing, and sort of creating all these different diversions all over the place so that the Earth Federation is split, trying to deal with it while they're having their naval review, and then he comes up on top of them and shoots the nuke down. It's just really great, tense kind of action stuff that then culminates in, what really in many ways does feel like the climax of the whole show, which is Kou and Gato finally have their confrontation again, and their battle is so fierce that both of their Gundams are destroyed. And I mean, it's such a feels like the climax of the show that's the whole initial like inciting incident for the plot, is they're testing the Gundams, and then Gundam GPO-2 is stolen, and so then Kou must become the pilot of the GPO-1 because it's the only other mobile suit that could compete with GPO-2, and then he has to go get it. Like, that's the whole setup of the plot, and here it's concluded by both of the suits being destroyed and destroying each other. And so it does have this really great climactic feel. And there's a fantastic moment where, they both have to escape their Gundams. And as Kou's getting out, he looks up and just like sort of has this big intake of breath as he sees that Gato has gotten out at the same time. And they're like just staring at each other, face like almost their helmets touching. They're so close. And Gato says, like, your name is Uraki, right? I'll make sure I'll never forget it. And then he jumps away. that sequence is very good. Like, that's the best, and that's like the most they ever tried to go for the rival ace pilot thing in Stardust Memory. And I wish that they had leaned more into that over the course of the show, because it is some of the best executed that kind of rival ace pilot sequence you get, outside of like Amuro and Char fucking sword fighting on OVA-a-thon.
It's so good, and it's like, because it's also in that fight, you can actually see they do a good job of showing how Kou has grown as a pilot to be able to fight Gato. Like, there's this great moment that leads to like the finale of that fight where he realizes Gato is not fighting with his left arm because it was disabled in the blast, because like the recoil was so huge, Gato has lost control of his left arm when he fired the blast, and so he can't use that arm of his Gundam, and Kou uses that to like come in from that side and get him off guard and then win the upper hand. And so it's like well scripted, it's well storyboarded, it's well animated, it's got the voice acting, it's all coming together. And that should not be episode 10 of 13. I'm not sure how you could make that work as it's not even anti-penultimate episode. It's too early in the show for this to be happening. That would be like if Amuro and Char had their big cool sword fight and then there were 5 episodes of Gundam left. Like, what are you doing? This is it. This has to be kicking into the final phase, and yet it basically starts another arc after that. It's so weird.
Yes, because we find out that this was only part 1 of Operation Stardust, and part 2 is like really weirdly complex with like this is where you get the colony jacking, and they like knock off the mirrors of the colonies because that's going to then degrade their orbit around each other, and so then they'll like bounce off of each other, and then one of the colonies will then head towards the moon. But really what they want then is to have the people on the Luna colony on the moon shoot a laser that bounces off of one of the solar panels on the colony, that will then create enough heat that will ignite some of the boosters on the colony, because they didn't have enough energy to ignite the boosters, and then that will change the trajectory of the colony to then head towards Earth. And then once it gets past the point of no return on its trajectory towards Earth, then Gato has to get inside and then activate the rest of the ignition stuff, even though I don't know where you get the energy to ignite it there if you didn't have it originally, because there's no colony shooting a laser at it. But he has the energy to ignite the fuel, then make the final adjustment for the colony to drop on Jaburo. And all that shit happens in those 3 episodes, on top of all the shit that, like, Kou, our protagonist, isn't even involved in any of that. And it's, like, so overly complex a plan for what really just is, we're dropping a colony on Jaburo, which is what their plan is. I feel like there are, like, 5 too many steps in getting you from episode 11 to we're just dropping the colony on Jaburo.
Okay, I actually do have a question. Are they trying to drop it on Jaburo? Because in that last scene when Gato is making the course corrections and Nina is there, she assumes that, and he says, no, I'm doing something else. You're the only one who's going to learn what Stardust actually was. But then there's no, like, what was the actual plan? Is it Jaburo?
My assumption with that line was I thought he was saying more like, philosophically, he's not dropping it on Jaburo, he's dropping it on the ideology of the Earth Federation. I thought that's maybe what he was like trying to get at. Okay. Because my assumption is that when Bosk Ohm fires the solar system for the second time, it damages the space colony enough that it diverts it so that it lands somewhere in like North America. I forget where they say it, like hits somewhere and like destroys the North American like grain farm, whatever the fuck they said it did. It's like all that shit is so compressed in the second half of episode 13 that it is not particularly clear. I don't know. Like, yeah, because you're right. I mean, they never explicitly say where precisely it dropped and what the effects were and what they were trying to go for, what Gato hoped to happen. They never. I mean,
the show literally concludes with text on the screen trying to fill in the rest of the story frantically because they ran out of time.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, episode 10 is the last good episode of Stardust Memory. 11, 12, 13 are all different shades of bad. 11 is not terrible. It's got some nice moments in it because it is the classic, we're going to do a little coup and steal this thing because the Federation is being bad and we have to get off of this base, and like every Gundam hits that note eventually. It's not a great version of that. It's not a horrible version of it. But then 12 and 13, like 12 is one of the most weirdly toothless episodes in all of Gundam. Like, nothing happens. Like, it's just, they're kind of chasing it down. Kou doesn't really like fight anyone interesting. Like, basically, Gato gets what he wants. Like nothing. It's nothing. It didn't need to be there.
Yeah, no, it's so. On episode 11. One thing I'll say about that one is we do get the Lavian Rose back, which
Yes.
is a good cameo. And I do like that the Lavian Rose just has a real problem with Gundam protagonists going and stealing shit and escaping, because that's exactly what they do in the last arc of Double Zeta. That kind of kicks off the end of that show. And I do like that, and I like the Lavian Rose. And I do like the ridiculous, stupid GPO3 Gundam in like this giant, just fucking, I don't even know what that thing is. They just put a Gundam inside of, I don't even know why they have the Gundam have like the rest of the Gundam body. It should just be a Gundam head, like the Devil Gundam, on this like big fucking weapon, like a gun basically with jetpacks on it, which is what they put the GPO3 in. But yeah, no, episode 12 is just a lot of vague political maneuvering, because the other thing that's where it's like super overcomplicated is that you have Seema, who is the weird Zeon pirate-ish lady that we like, who's a very cool character because she's got a cool character design, and like her attitude is like fucking rad, and I love her. And she pilots the Gerba Tetra, which is a fucking fantastic mobile suit design. And so she's very cool, but they never really, I feel like, execute on that character all the way, because she just gives some like vague, desperate attempts at backstory here as she like betrays the General Delaz dude who's commanding
It
Gato.
makes no sense.
Yeah, because she's made a deal with the Federation, so the Federation knows about the colony drop plan. And they've like maneuvered things in such a way that like they're like, oh, we're gonna make it so our fleet doesn't get there in time, and the guy who's running Jabro doesn't like know that that's what they're doing, because you have Jamatov. You have the one cameo of Jamatov from Zeta Gundam, the main dude from the Titans, and he's there, and he's like, we are doing our own thing that will stop it. And then you find out that Basque Ohm then has the Solar System 2, and they're going to use the Solar System 2 to try to disintegrate the colony. And so Seema knows that because she gave them all the plans, and so she's going to betray them and go over to the Federation. But then it all goes to shit, and like Seema just dies in episode 13. And it's like, it's just like way overly complicated for what they're trying to do, and it just ends up feeling like the Seema character, who was really promising and cool and interesting, she would be a really interesting character if they gave some more of that backstory. And I think there's something there if you kind of paired her more effectively with Gato and showed that like the flaws in Gato's idealism, that she is also a space noid who is maybe not going to benefit from what Zeon is trying to do, which feels like what they're implying, but they don't flesh any of that out at all. She just like desperately says it, and then she gets killed in like 10 minutes after that point.
Yeah, I agree with all that. It like the last two episodes feel like they had no idea how to end it, and so they're throwing a lot of weird plot twists and turns at the wall to see what sticks, and none of it does, and then they don't really resolve any of the interesting parts of the show, and then it ends. Because do you want to talk about a storm raging through the very well titled but very terrible finale of Stardust Memory?
Yeah, so that's where we get episode 13 of Stardust Memory. So you've got, Seema fights Kou. Gato, destroys the Solar System 2 control ship or whatever, so the colony is still alive. And then Gato boards the colony to go make the final adjustments to, I'm just going to say it's going to hit Jaburo. And that, Gato just likes to be very poetic about shit, and that's what he's saying about, like, that's not really what we're landing on. We're landing on the heart of fascism and the control of the Earth Federation of Space, which is, of course, really Jaburo, because that's where the headquarters of the Earth Federation is. And goes there to do that. Meanwhile, Nina Purpleton steals a ship in Gundam fashion, just steals a fucking ship out of the docking bay in one of these big capital ships, because I love that. People really need to fucking like remember to lock the door when they get out. You gotta make sure, maybe like jiggle the handle when you get out to make sure that it locked all the way, because fucking people in Gundam have a real problem with not locking mobile suits and like jet fighters and shit. Because she steals one, goes to Gato on the space colony, confronts Gato about Gato probably going to end up killing millions of people by dropping the colony. although she doesn't seem as concerned about that as you would expect a person to be. And then Kou shows up, and that's where you get the whole, Nina, what are you doing? And she's like, I just can't stand watching both of you fight each other. I can't believe you just shot Gato. Now I'm going to point a gun and shoot at you, Kou, and then we're going to leave, and then the colony is going to drop, and then the show is going to be over, and then we'll have a post-credit scene where, like, it implies that we get in a relationship again, even though I, Nina Purpleton, have just done what feels like is one of the most just, like, despicable things I've seen a character do in a piece of fiction. Like, it is so profoundly fucked up and comes absolutely out of nowhere. The like, extent to which she goes for Gato here. A character that she has only had screen time with once when she saw him in episode 1 and made absolutely no reaction to recognizing him whatsoever. And it's only, like, very vaguely alluded over the past few episodes that she kind of maybe still has feelings for this person, that we never get a sense that they, like, there's no romantic, like, tension or chemistry between those two characters. It doesn't make sense. I don't know what or how Gato and her met on the moon after the end of the 1 year war. Apparently also
I don't get the sense this is someone Gato would like. I don't like.
No.
There's nothing about Nina Purpleton that would attract a man like Anavel Gato. Like, for one, like, how old would she have been? Like, there's a bunch of questions of, like, this makes literally, like, it feels like a child telling you and then Barney and Spider-Man got together and they climbed the Empire State Building. Like, it's like the weirdest fucking plot turn that just comes out of absolutely nowhere. It's one of the worst plot twists I've ever seen in anything.
Yeah, it is truly dreadful. And it just, like, takes Nina, who's a character I didn't particularly like, and it just murders her. Like, it is the dirtiest I've ever seen a character get done. And it's so bad. It's just so bad. And it makes, nothing about it makes any sense. And when I was looking up stuff, I found out that apparently Nina is supposed to be 21, and she's 21 over the course of Stardust Memory, which that makes no sense. She's 21 and Gato's 25, apparently.
No, he's not. No, he's not. I don't believe that. He's, well, like, late 30s. No, he's not. I'm not accepting that.
So that's what their official ages are. I mean, it makes no sense because the one thing in the early parts of Stardust Memory that I do like about Kou and Nina's relationship is I like her, like, being like the older, more experienced one in the relationship, and it's like a different dynamic you don't see typically in Gundam, because usually if there's a romance in Gundam, it's between two teenagers and it's like their true love, their destined, like, all that kind of shit. So it's nice to have, like, a setup that could lead to a more mature relationship. They absolutely, like, throw that away. But, like, you have the sense that she's, like, her mid to late 20s and Gato's maybe in his early 30s. But no, she's 21, which means that they would have been, they basically specifically say that they had met 3 years prior. So in 0080, right after the end of the 1 year war, Gato was on the moon and they met while she was 18. Which apparently that means that Nina is some sort of, like, child prodigy, because if she's 21, that should mean that she just graduated college with, like, a bachelor's degree, and she needs to have, she's like a PhD fucking lady working at Anaheim designing, like, prototype extreme, like, new cool mobile suit technology. It's like that she is very accomplished for being 21 fucking years old. So, like, none of that makes sense, but that's what their official ages are supposed to be, but that's what matches up with the dialogue in the show, because they do specifically say 3 years earlier and specifically say 18. So it's like it matches up with that they say in the show. So that is their official ages. But yeah, apparently they were together. They had some kind of relationship somehow. I mean, Gato seems like a character that is effectively asexual to me. Like, he seems like the only true love he has is independence for space noids, and everything else be damned. So I can't picture how he had a relationship with Nina, a woman who has no politics as far as we are expressed. And that's, like, further reinforced by how she's used in this sequence, where she's so devoid of ideology that when confronted with her past lover who believes in space noid independence to the extent that he's willing to kill millions of people by dropping a colony, and Kou, who's kind of a wet blanket that doesn't have much of an ideology, but doesn't believe that you should kill millions of people for the sake of an ideological cause. When faced with that choice, she's just kind of like, she's like the worst centrist possible. She's like, I choose both paths, which is neither spacepoint independence nor saving millions of lives. I choose the path where millions of people die. Both of you are going to die, but I'm going to try to keep you from killing each other for like 5 more seconds. And the Space Noids aren't going to have independence because I'm not really going to help the Space Noid cause either, because I don't get a sense that she believes in the Zeons or the Space Noids or any of that shit. I don't know what she believes in, other than she doesn't want her 2 boyfriends fighting each other, which is the worst fucking motivation you could possibly give a character.
I mean, it's worse than... I was going to say this is like worse than the love triangle in Twilight, and that's an insult to Twilight. Twilight has a fairly well-developed love triangle. This is just stupid.
I mean, you can't do a love triangle as a plot twist. It just doesn't work. I don't think you could possibly do a love triangle as a plot twist. It is completely anathema to the concept in the plot dynamics of love triangles. Like or hate a love triangle dynamic in a plot, and I think they can be done well, and I think I've often seen them be done very poorly, but when done well, they are done to create tension and drama over the course of the plot by developing the fucking love triangle. It's like love triangles are supposed to be there and developed and established early in the plot of something so that you can evolve the love triangle over the course and get like all the tension and suspense you can get out of the love triangle setup. Here, you just have a fairly normal relationship between Nina and Kou. It's not a great or compelling relationship, but it's just like a romantic relationship between these 2 characters. And then in the 11th fucking hour, they decide to throw in a love triangle completely out of nowhere, like, you know, blindsiding both the audience and your protagonist with it in the second half of the last episode, and having her effectively choose the character in the love triangle that she has had almost no screen time with at all. That is like I can't comprehend how you would make that choice. I don't understand, you know, how you get to that point that that's the plot choice you've made is to do that. It is so incomprehensible to me.
Yeah. And if you... So let me go back to my schema of the 3 things Stardust Memory is about. Because I think we would classify the Nina romance as the part of the coming-of-age plot, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this is where that falls apart entirely, because basically Kou, because this is also, Kou has almost no dialogue in this final episode. Almost none. And like, once he leaves I think his last line in Stardust Memory is to Gato, where he says, "You waited for me," when he gets out of the colony, and he never talks again. And so the rest of this, so like, we never know how Kou absorbs this thing with Nina. We never know how this like impacts his coming of age story. We don't know how this affects him as a man. We get in the final scene him getting out of prison, and Nina is there and she smiles, and I guess we're supposed to assume they're in a relationship now. But there is effectively no denouement, no conclusion, no wrap up, and if anything, they like recomplicate it and then just end it in the coming of age story, and that is just completely obliterated. And I think it was clumsy before then, but there were moments I liked. Like, there's a little moment in one of the episodes where Nina makes fun of him for not eating his carrots, so he goes and tries to eat carrots in private. That's a cute scene. That could work. But like, holistically, the coming of age story is completely obliterated by this, right, Sean?
Oh, absolutely. And it's like the thing, so this is where we come back to what I said earlier about Kou's primary motivation being like his own sense of emasculation, in his sense of like not being good enough. And it's like, it just feels so dark and gross to then take that character. And I mean, they do a cuckolding story. Like, that's what it is. It's like, and now your rival ace pilot that you've been trying to prove yourself against the whole time takes your fucking girlfriend. Like, that's what they do with the plot. And it's such a gross plot twist that's so unnecessary. And then the conclusion of it just kind of sweeps all that under the rug. And it's the kind of thing where, like, if what they did was after this, you know, whatever, the colony drops, all that shit happens, and then you cut to, it's like the Jamatov's speech, and he's saying, and they were constructing the Titans because we have the threats, and all that shit happens. And then you cut to, with a ship where all of our characters are now becoming Titans and putting on the jackets, and then Kou like walks out of the bathroom and he's dyed his hair blonde, and Keith walks up and is like, Kou, like, what are you doing? What's going on? He says, don't call me that name anymore. I've decided to live by a new life. Call me Jared. And he became Jared. Then it would be like, okay, because this is the origin story of a character like Jared, someone who has this unfounded belief in his own his own abilities as a pilot and all this shit, but really deep down is motivated by this sense of incompetence and emasculation to other pilots that is also really heavily fixated on his relationships with women. Like, that is the cocktail that is Jared Mesa from Zeta Gundam, who is a great bad a great bad guy, good antagonist character of that show. And if that's what they did at the end, I still don't think I would like the show. And, you know, obviously they wouldn't literally have him, like, actually be Jared, but be metaphorically a Jared.
I like this idea. No, I like that Jared's backstory is he got cucked by an engineer. I think that's perfect.
Because, again, if that's what you did and then have him become a Titan, I still think that most of, like, the execution along the way was rough as fuck, and it would be so weirdly dark and, like, kind of inappropriate. But at least I could see, like, a thematic argument for what they're doing. But then to just have this weird thing where then Kou just gets so frustrated by everything that happens that he just kind of goes crazy and shoots wildly into the air, and he gets court-martialed for it because that, like, Bascom's ship he was, like, kind of vaguely shooting at, I guess. And he gets court-martialed for, like, a year.
Oh, I thought he was court-martialed for stealing the Gundam on the Levia and Rose.
It might be that. I think it's a combination of that and him, like, just kind of going crazy and shooting. They don't, like, it's so haphazardly cut at this point that it's, like, just vague implication. But yes, he has this, like, kind of court-martial, which I think it was supposed to be for a year, but then it gets swept under the rug because it's like, but none of these events happened because we don't officially recognize them. So if none of this happened, he can't be court-martialed for it. And then he goes back to the training place. Apparently, he's still a member of the fucking Earth Federation, and Nina's there, and they smile at each other, and I'm like, dude, if there is ever a good reason to break up with someone, it's probably for them to choose their ex-boyfriend over you as their ex-boyfriend is committing an act of genocide while you're trying to stop it, and she points a gun at you and fires a fucking gun at you. Like, you gotta get out of that relationship, Kou, because it's really not going good. Like, that's really... Like, relationship therapy is not going to fix the problems that you guys have. You really need to go... it's really sad that Kelly died, but you gotta get, like, someone else in your life because fucking hell, dude. Like, you should not be with Nina because what she does in episode 13 is fucking bad.
It's bad. Okay, so coming of age story. Like, that is the worst part of the show. Is it falls down so hard on that.
Yeah.
But it also really notably falls down on my second part of the schema, which is the rival aces story, because that comes to a head in episode 10, but then in episode 13, they don't get a final fight. Like, when they get out of the colony, they do kind of clash a little bit, but it is mostly cut away from off-screen. There is no definitive resolution because the colony laser goes off. Not the colony laser, but the solar system thing goes off. And it's just kind of limp at that point. It's not clear what they're fighting over. It's not clear why they would fight. Everything's fucked up. There's no real, again, sense of, like, Kou digesting this information that he's been cucked by Gato. Like, it's just the whole rival aces thing comes to nothing, and it's super disappointing. Like, if Char and Amuro didn't get a final fight, what the hell would you would be really mad? And one of the best things about Gundam is that final episode does a really good job of resolving that. And it resolves, they don't have to die. Like, Char and Amuro both make it out alive, but there is a very clear, definitive, like, ending to their rivalry, which is Amuro stabbed him through the helmet. He won, you know? There is nothing of that there. There is no resolution.
Yeah, and there can't be a resolution because Kou's character never comes to, like, grows to that point of resolution, right? He never is able to stand up and be an equal but opposite to Gato. He is always in fact he is in episode 10, and then they put him back down by doing the Nina shit. And so it makes him once again, like, inferior to Gato in this gross way, like this narratively really gross way. That then kind of robs his character of being able to have that Amuro-Char style rivalry where the characters confront each other and both have their beliefs and what they're trying to fight for. They both stand up for that, and they both, like, grown to that point to have that confidence, which is kind of which is the dynamic, the classic ace rival dynamic, is have both of them represent whatever their, like, various politics or ideology are, and then have them fight and shout at each other over it while they're fighting. That's the whole concept, and they just... they do a lot of it in episode 10, and it's fun there, and then they just, like, hit the rewind button and try it over again, and they do it way worse the second time.
Yeah. Also, like, the fight choreography in the brief glimpses of their little bout near the colony we get is really bad because they're both in these, like, giant mobile armors that are not, that can't fight.
Yeah.
And it's just awkward, and it's bad.
I do like the giant fuck-off beam saber that Kou has in his crazy Gundam thingy, though.
It's good. Yeah. And I do really love the design of Gato's insane giant mobile armor. It's very cool. I love when he sees it, he goes, it's like the spirit of Zeon, built in steel, and it's so good.
Yeah.
Akio Otsuka, I want him to narrate my life. Okay, so my third part of the schema was the Gato side of the story, and this guy who is a Zeon true believer trying to fight for independence. I think it is the part of the show does best of these three. But it also falls flat, I feel like, in this final episode. Like, Gato not getting what he wanted, that's fine. And that's probably how this story... I mean, it is how it had to end, because we know Zeta happens, and we know Double Zeta happens, and we know Haman Karn is out there waiting to kind of pick up the cause, not because she believes in it, but because she wants to be queen. But, like, when you talk about all the weird nihilism, there's also something weirdly nihilistic about this that, again, I think they could have turned into something. Because I think if this were from Gato's POV... and the ending of his story is that he sees the enemy become the full-blown fascists he always kind of believed them to be, and that's what defeats him, is very dark but very interesting. But really, we never, again, get a sense of, like, what Gato feels about his failures and everything, because he just collects the remnants, and they do a kamikaze run, and that's it. And it's just a very anticlimactic ending for this really interesting character.
Yeah, that it just kind of feels like it doesn't say anything about anything. It just sort of just like stops. And it just doesn't... It's why it's so unsatisfying as a conclusion, is it doesn't feel like it resolves the tensions in the story between the sort of like anti-politics of Kou and the life that he's led and the extreme idealistic politics of Gato that also in some ways lead him astray because they are betrayed by Sema. And if they had done the Sema side of the story better, could have maybe like poked some holes in like the perfection of Gato's idealism and shown that like the Zeon is not perfect either, and that he's maybe not considering the full consequences of some of the shit he's doing. Which is also another problem with the ending here, is that they'd never really, I feel like, give you that like Char's counterattack thing of maybe you believe in a lot of what Char's fighting for, but you're also always going to cut back to Earth and see all the people that are going to die for him to get the thing that Char wants to get, and you have to, as a viewer, like wrestle with the cost of what they are like trying to do. And Stardust Memory, like a lot of the Gundams, once you start moving into this kind of post-Tomino world, I mean, this is, Victory Gundam still to come and that kind of stuff. But you start getting, once other people other than Tomino start doing Gundam, you get a lot more of this, like, weirdly kind of bloodless perspective of it, where it's like you get to have all the fighting and the crazy military stuff, but you don't get as much cutaways into the cockpits and watching people explode. You don't get the cutaways to the people living in the colonies or living on Earth that are going to be impacted by these acts of massive destruction. And that's another area where I feel like it just kind of takes the easy way out by allowing you to really like kind of fully get behind Gato, partially because it just never bothers to develop in any kind of counterpoint to it at any point over the course of the 13 episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's especially weird coming after Char's counterattack, because this would have been the first Gundam thing to come out after. Well, no, you would have had War in the Pocket and then this.
Yeah.
But like, it feels like it should have learned more lessons from Char's counterattack, which also makes this whole story feel a little redundant, because it is like, boy, we've had a lot of colony drop stories at this point, between the original Gundam and Double Zeta does it, and Char's counterattack does it, and then this one does it, and this one like develops that idea the least. I kind of wish Operation Stardust was something more interesting, but like, yeah, it's just because Gato's like death, it does not have anything to do with Kou, so it doesn't tie into the rival aces thing. It doesn't reflect anything on Kou's coming of age. It doesn't really tell us anything more other than he's a true believer to the end, which I believe. But, like, yeah, it's just not interrogated or done anything interesting with. Like, frankly, his death scene kind of feels like they wrote a script without that, and then we're like, God, we forgot to tie up that loose end, so he flies into a ship and blows up. The end.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. I think it. So yes, this is where I think Stardust Memory is one of those shows that I think is somehow less than the sum of its parts. Because I think I can list so many good things about this show. Yet as we analyze it, Sean, like if you identify the three overarching things that it is about, it fails pretty badly on all of those. Holistically, I think it's kind of a failure, even though what do I like about it? We've listed a lot of them. We've talked about it. It's phenomenally directed and animated, and it's got some individually really good episodes, but it is so all over the place. I mean, it's a show that does have some of my favorite Gundam episodes, but I also think episode 13 is the single worst episode of Gundam I've seen. In the stuff we've covered on this show, I don't think any Gundam show has a worse episode than A Storm Raging Through.
Yeah, I would take a Kukuru's Doan's Island any day over...
Yes.
Over
like
this,
if I just think of let's just think of the other notably bad episodes. Like Kukuru's Doan's Island actually is fucking fine. It's not bad.
It's just a funny. Tomino hates it.
Yeah, but like Double Zeta has the one with like the weird colony people in the Amazon or what. Yeah, Moon. That's bad, but it's nowhere near this bad.
Yeah, Moon is like at least a fun, weird, like Star Trek, like what if Gundam did Star Trek story that like I enjoy even if it's not particularly well done.
Yeah. Victory Gundam has the episode with the weird bikini models who attack Uso. That's pretty bad, but it's just a kind of blip on the radar. It's nothing like this. It doesn't ruin Victory
and
Gundam.
At least that has like some really fucked up, crazy psychosexual bullshit associated with it. That even if like you think it's fucked up, at least it's like fascinating. Even if it's like not good.
Yeah. G Gundam has the episode with the clown and the clown backstory, but that one is so bad it's good. That one is amazing. And again, the fate of G Gundam's plot is not riding on the clown episode, so it's a little different. And then Gundam Wing, I think, has a lot of like... I think Gundam Wing is pretty bland and boring in the second half, but there's no individual episode of Gundam Wing I look at and I'm like, that's the bad one.
With Gundam Wing, it's like an overall like impact of like some poor narrative choices that end up snowballing over the course of that show. But you're right, it doesn't manifest in like a single episode. That just feels it's like, I think part of it was the Storm Raging Through is just like it just feels like obligatory or something in a weird way for some of it, where it's like they have these really weird narrative swings that feel like they come out of nowhere, and the rest of it is just sort of like really dull. Like we're just like finishing it. It doesn't have this like great sense of climax and resolution to it. It just kind of stops in most of those kind of arcs and themes and stuff, vague themes that they've set up over the course of the show. And
we're going to talk about 8th MS Team next time, and 8th MS Team is the polar fucking opposite of this in that its final episodes, its climax is like the best of what that show is. It builds to something, you know?
Yeah. And because yes, absolutely, the 8th MS Team, which I'm super excited about to watch. Like I actually got the Blu-ray of that fairly recently because I was
cool.
if we're going to watch that, I want to actually get the nice Blu-ray for it. But yeah, with Stardust Memory, I think like it is that thing where this episode is so bad in the way that it executes on the things that Stardust Memory was building up. It's like so much of the theming and plotting of Stardust Memory feels like it's like punting for like a payoff later down the line. It's like, okay, well, you have this confrontation in episode 2 where Gato accuses Kou of like not believing in anything and says, well, what are you even fighting for? And Kou's kind of shaken by it. Well, that's going to be a cool idea that we can pay off later. And they just kind of kick it down the line. And then they never really pay it off. And I feel like that's true of all the real character relationships outside of Lieutenant Burning, who's obviously that's resolved in the episode where he's killed. But all the other stuff with like his rivalry with Muncho and the other pilots, his friendship with Keith's relationship with Mora, any of that stuff, like all the SEMA stuff just sort of like fizzles out because it felt like they kept on punting. There's like, we'll explain what this like weird enigmatic lady's deal is in a later episode, and they just kick it down the line. And by the time they get to it, they're like, oh, well, she just is like a weird traitor and we don't have time to get into her backstory, even though it seems like she'd be pretty cool. And so then we just have to kill her. And it just feels like every single element here over the course of Stardust Memory, they kicked a lot of stuff down the line to be able to do some like fun episodes in the moment and have some good action and that kind of stuff. But then once it came time to actually finally pull off all the stuff they had kicked down the line, they had 3 episodes left and had no idea what to do with it. And so then it's like, well, let's just make Nina fall in love with Gato because that'll be shocking. And then it's over. The end.
Yep, it's not good. So a couple other thoughts
Okay.
as we conclude. Well, okay, we said that's the worst episode. Is there a worse Gundam character than Nina Purpleton? At least in the stuff we've talked about so far.
Okay, and the stuff we've talked about so far, that limits it. I don't think so. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like who would even be in the running, and I just like
Because I don't think there is. There's characters I'm lukewarm on, but no one who like is she's nails on a chalkboard for most of this show. I mean, it's sexist and bad and backwards, but also just like a bad character to watch.
it just feels like they don't have a consistent characterization for her, because there are moments in episodes where I like her just fine, and then it feels like the episode after that she turns into a totally different person, which like lends to that weird Victorian like hysterics kind of element of her character that then in the last 4 episodes just goes into overdrive, and it's completely ridiculous. And yeah, like off the top of my head, I mean, honestly, off the top of my head, I can't even think of another character that I'm like, this is like a really bad Gundam character. Who else is like in that running? Gundam's usually really good with its characters.
Yeah, I mean, Gundam Wing, I don't like Hero and some of the Gundam pilots suck, but like they don't suck like this.
No, yeah, like Hiro Yui annoys me, but he's not on the level of Nina Purpleton. Like he's just like a dull character archetype done dully, but he's not like actively frustrating. Like the thing, we will talk about a Nina Purpleton-esque character in some future Gundam stuff that I can think of, where it is a character where it feels like the character actively gets in the way of things that the show could have done well. But they've made such poor choices with the character and have changed the character's characterization multiple times for the sake of plotting in weird ways that just makes them incredibly annoying to watch. There are characters like that in Gundam. We just haven't encountered them yet.
Yeah. So, okay. And on that note, I have a line in my notes that just says, why can't women be pilots? And this is a big problem I have with Stardust Memory, and I know it starts to radiate out into Gundam from here, and it bothers me. Stardust Memory is the first Gundam work that does not have women flying mobile suits. The original Gundam has it in plenty of places, including Sayla starts flying the core fighter. Or what's it called? The Gundam parts?
Yeah, she also pilots the Gundam multiple times. But yeah, she flies the G fighter. Yeah.
Yeah, the G fighter. Zeta Gundam, there are, frankly, more women piloting suits than men in that show.
Yeah.
Double Zeta, there's women all over. You've got fucking Haman Karn's the villain. Char's Counterattack, you've got it. F-91, you've got it. It is a consistent thing. War in the Pocket, there are 2 main pilots in that show. One of them's a dude, one of them's a lady. This is like a consistent thing in Gundam that there is not in this like future space military. There are probably more men doing combat stuff, which like reflects current militaries, but it is not segregated that way. Women are out there flying, planes and mobile suits, and that is just a totally normalized thing. It is not like Sayla gets in the Gundam and is like, oh, and Bright's like, a woman in a Gundam, what the hell? Like, it's just a normal thing in this world. And then you hit Stardust Memory, which is this weird brick wall where suddenly there are no women in combat. They are exclusively engineers and secretaries, and everyone in a military uniform is a dude. And it is really, really conspicuous when you hold it up next to all other Gundam. If you just hold it up to anime and media, you might not notice it as much. But in the context of Gundam, this was the first one that did that. And in 90s Gundam, that starts to sadly kind of become a thing. After War Gundam X does not have major female pilot characters. Gundam Wing has no major female pilot characters. All the Tomino stuff in the 90s still does. Victory Gundam and Turn A all over the place because that's how he writes characters. And my understanding, Sean, is that it's also a thing in some other future Gundam we're going to talk about, and it bothers me, and I don't like it.
Yeah, because I will say so, because you do have Seema, who does pilot the mobile suit in Stardust Memory, but like that almost like highlights the exception because she's not a normal military pilot, right?
And
she's like,
and it's only
pirate.
Briefly in the finale.
Yeah, so she's the only one, and the fact that she's the exception makes it feel like it's this weird exception. But yeah, you don't have women who are like pilots in the military that are amongst the normal like crew and stuff like that. And it's frustrating. Like, it's not like every Gundam thing from now on. Like there are definitely 2000s Gundam shows that have women piloting just fine. Like you have Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny both have female pilots, but you do
That's
have
good.
here and there. It becomes like a thing where it feels like off the top of my head, it's like kind of every other one. You end up having that kind of like there might be one or two women who pilot it, but generally speaking, they're not like mixed in with the general cast of characters. And it is frustrating, and it is particularly stark in Stardust Memory because it is doing like this whole Top Gun thing, and as a result of that, it is having not only are there not women piloting the mobile suits, but you have a lot of male characters who are like notably sexist, and that's like a like specific character trait that they have, and it's like feels like it's tacitly reinforced by the fact that women are either are engineers or support personnel and men are pilots. And so then men like, you know, then Monsha like takes pictures of Nina and like puts it up in his cockpit when she's not looking and all this kind of shit. And it's just gross. And the show doesn't provide any counterpoint to that. Like I said, like it would have been fine if that was just a thing in episode 3 when that character was introduced, but it's a consistent recurring thing with him and some of those other male pilot characters.
Yeah, and it's just, I think it's especially conspicuous because this is the only Universal Century show
Yeah.
where that's a thing. It's just the only one, and it is stark in that it just, like, you look at the backgrounds of scenes and everything, it visually presents a gender-segregated military, which is not what Universal Century Gundam does. It's just, that is not how that works in the rest of the works. Like, it's a little imbalanced, and there are other things we can talk about that are problematic around gender, but, like, that's just not one of them. And it's very weird that Stardust Memory just feels like it's a little out of continuity almost in how stark it is about this, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
One of many frustrating things about this show.
Yes. So what else do we want to say about this show before we finish for today, Sean?
I mean, once again, I do want to shout out like some of the stuff that it does particularly well. Like even if it, and again, I think my feelings on Stardust Memory will ultimately go back to how I felt after my first watching. I think I'll have forgotten a lot of the middle of the show and mostly remember it for this very bad ending because the ending leaves such a bitter taste in your mouth. But there is so much good stuff along the way, and it is a very notable entry. It's got some like killer Gundam designs, like the GPO-1 and GPO-2 are great Gundam designs. The Gerba Tetra is a really great Zeon mobile suit design. Fantastic music, some really fun character moments and action, and I think it is a show worth watching if you are a fan of Gundam. But it is certainly like not to the level of most of what Gundam as a franchise has to offer.
Yeah. I want to shout out some of the voice acting. We already have sung the praises of Akio Otsuka. He's great in everything. He's really good as Gato. That's the Gundam character he was born to play. I love Akio Otsuka's father, Chikao Otsuka, who's also a notable voice actor, is in this. He plays Captain Synapse, and he's so good. I love that voice. I really love Masashi Sugawara as South Burning. I mean, the names... This is one of the best set of names for a non-Tomino production, with, like, Anavel Gato, Nina Purpleton, Afar Synapse, South Burning, Chuck Keith. I mean, it's very good.
Chuck Keith is like I want Chuck Keith and Slugger Law to hang out together because they are the two American Gundam characters.
Yes, and I actually hadn't realized Kelly Leisner, who is the Kelly we've been talking about, the warrior of Von Braun, that's Tesho Genda, which I probably should have recognized. It's Tesho Genda, but I'm like, that's why I really liked that character, because Tesho Genda is in that same like generation as Akio Otsuka and Shigeru Chiba, where he's in everything and he's always great.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good acting. And then I think there is the fun, like, historical thing of hearing a pre-Vegeta Ryo Horikawa as Ko, because Ryo Horikawa has, like, pretty heavily been typecast after Vegeta, and in fact, he's prolific, but not as prolific as a lot of people of his generation, in part, I think, because Vegeta he's recording Vegeta lines probably every week of the year since whenever he started that. Same as like Masuko Nozawa does not do a ton outside of Goku, obviously. But like, Ryo Horikawa for like gruff, bad dude Vegeta, and he is one of the best. He is so good at that, and he always has been. And you look at some of his other roles, and there's some other similar stuff like that. But this is this early role from him where he is playing this like young. Oh, actually, this wouldn't be pre-Vegeta. Vegeta was 1989, so I'm a little off. But like, this is early in that, and he's playing this like young kid, coming of age thing, and it is just really funny for me as someone who knows him through Vegeta to hear him be so, like trying to sound like he is so young and innocent. It's so funny.
Yeah, and I think he does a very, very good job in Stardust Memory, and it's a really good performance.
Yes.
My favorite thing about it, though, is now Ryo Horikawa, because again, Stardust Memory is pretty popular in the fan base, so that means that they bring these characters back for the video games a lot. So that means that Horikawa is now in a hell where he has to, every 3 or 4 years, a new big Gundam game comes out that has all these characters in them, and you like Gundam Versus, which just came out on PS4, the new one. And he has to go do voices for it, and it's like, now it's like, I mean, how old is he? He's like in his 50s or like early 60s maybe.
He's 62.
Yeah, so he's a 62-year-old man who now has to play this like 19-year-old Kou Uraki, and it's like, it is still good because it's still Horikawa, but he maybe doesn't sound quite as innocent as he does in this original recording from '91.
Yeah, for some reason, I mean, I knew what years Dragon Ball Z aired, but like in my mind, this was pre-Dragon Ball Z, and it's not. So it's even funnier to me to know that contemporaneously he was in the booth one day for Kou, and then went and did Vegeta. That's hilarious to me. And that would have been like, this would have been like the Frieza saga years.
Yeah,
which is the peak of like crazy Vegeta. So yeah, but no, I mean, it's a very good cast. It always is. I really like the music in this one.
Oh yeah,
the music's always good, but it's great.
The music's fantastic. Now I'm looking at the list of characters, and I now am coming to discover, Jonathan, that Nina's dad is named Peter Purpleton, which is
that's so good.
That's maybe in the running for among the best of all Gundam names. Peter Purpleton is very good. It's a name you can't say without getting a smile on your face.
No, that's in the same like realm as Ramba Ral's dad, Jimba.
Yes,
I mean,
Jimba
that's
Ral.
pretty good. Yeah,
Peter Purpleton.
Peter Purpleton.
Oh my god, so good.
It sounds like for this one they like, Tomino didn't work on this show, but I have to imagine like they called him up and said, "Hey, we need character names," and he flipped open a notebook and was like, "All right, I've got you covered." Because I assume that's what Tomino does in his free time, is he takes a notebook out of his pocket and just writes down silly names.
Yes, yeah, and you don't know if you're going to get a South Burning or a Chuck Keith. It is the contrast between the fairly normal names and then the Peter Purpletons of the world that makes it so good.
So good. All right. Anything else to say about Stardust Memory? I'm really glad we did this. I enjoyed talking through this series. This was a good one, I think.
Yeah, this is one that I had been looking forward to doing a podcast on, because obviously, like when I forever ago, before Jonathan, before time when you had never even seen a Gundam, and I've been thinking about, I want to do a Gundam podcast because I want to talk about Gundam. There were like a handful of Gundam ones that like were specifically, these are the ones I really want to talk about. It was all the ones I really liked, and then it was the few that like I didn't like but had things I wanted to say about. And obviously, Mobile Suit Gundam and Turn A Gundam and Zeta and Double Zeta and Charge Counterattack, all those were in the I really want to talk about them and like them. This was the first of the I don't particularly like this show, but I really want to talk about it. In a way I didn't necessarily feel about Gundam Wing, but I really felt about this. I wanted to do this podcast. It's been a long time.
Absolutely. And next time, Sean, I feel like this is the dessert. This is when we get our cake and we get to dive into it. 8th MS Team is just, mwah. It is, if you have not seen 8th MS Team, you are in for the treat of all treats. That's all I can say.
Absolutely. And that will, 8th MS Team is the last of the original run of OVAs. That takes us, it's the last of the Universal Century OVAs. And then after that, we have to look towards Gundam Seed and moving on towards the bold new century of Gundam. But we've got some more just crazy, super high production value bullshit, some crazy Vietnam War-esque Gundam next time on the show when we look at Mobile Suit Gundam 08th MS Team.